Throughout my many years of painting, I have gotten excited about a lot of different pieces, but this one in particular really had me excited. We're going to be working on an 8 by 10 inch canvas. We're working with acrylics, and we are painting this very complex, gorgeous sky that you only really get after a grand storm. It's kind of when things start to calm, but you have that golden light shining through, and it's just such a beautiful aesthetic that we are going to render here today with only 3 different brushes. We have 5 tubes of paint. So we're really trying to keep a limited palette, a limited number of tools, because it is a visually complex piece, but I want to keep it simple. So if you are just stepping into acrylic painting, this should be nice, fun, easy. And speaking of making it easy, if you'd like help with the actual drawing process, I do have the traceable up over on Patreon. You can use that with a tracing paper or a projector. Alternatively, you can actually watch the full real-time drawing video where I'm sketching it out on the canvas with a grid, so you can draw it along with me if, again, you're somebody who loves painting but kind of struggle with that drawing process, getting everything where it needs to be, the scaling, all of that. And if you are really just jumping into acrylic painting, and if you do want to get a good starting point, you can find my ebook Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials, everything you need to know about acrylic painting, up over on my Patreon. There'll be a link to that in the video description, but in it we do talk about working with different brushes, water, how to mix our pigments, all the little things you need to know before you jump into a big piece like this. So with that, let's have some fun, let's make something special, let's make something together, and let's have a really good one. Are you ready? Are you ready to make a majestic painting here today? I know I am, and I'm quite excited to begin. We are going to do so within the sky. I do have a 1-inch flathead brush to block things in, and on our palette we have a titanium white, Naples yellow, cerulean blue, and an oxide black. Now I'm going to begin with the brightest point in our sky, right up here where we can actually see the sky. It's a little opening in the clouds. And we're going to grab a hint of our oxide black, a hint of our cerulean blue, but just a hint. We want this to be more of a mid to light gray, and we'll have a bit of an optical illusion later on where it'll look significantly more blue than it is. But we're just going to work this into the open area of sky at the top here. And as we begin to work our way down, we're going to interject a little bit of our Naples yellow into the mix. Not a grand amount, but enough to show that that sky is brightening up just a little bit. Then we're going to grab the original mix with a little bit of that yellow, a little bit of that blue, really a mix, 50-50. We're just going to put it into the openings in the sky that we have towards the left-hand side. Now, as you can see, acrylics can be quite thin, so you are likely going to want to do 2 layers of all of this, but I'm going to let that dry first, and then we'll just sink back into it. Okay, so that's just about fully dry. We can go back in with layer number 2, though the beauty is that every time you do a new layer, you probably do a better job than you did the first time. You make micro adjustments, you ask yourself, what did I like, what did I not, what can I do a little better? And with this one, I think we're just going to go a little brighter than we initially did. Beautiful. Working in an X-shaped pattern to move it up and down quite freely. Then, again, we interject that Naples yellow into the mix. Work that towards the bottom, keeping it bright, soft blend towards the top, and we can take this and interject it over here. You can already tell it looks significantly better, and that is just the power of layering with acrylics. Beautiful. See that from the side now? It's subtle, it's nice, it's thick, it has a soft gradient, and that's what we're looking for. That said, we can now start working on the clouds. Now, when we look at the clouds, it's pretty complex, but we're going to break it down, make it easy, and we're going to do so by starting with the distant clouds. Then we're going to move slightly in front until we get to the ones in the foreground. But we start back here with a lot of this golden light, work towards the shadows on the left-hand side, and again, this should be pretty intuitive once we break it down. Now, the clouds towards the back are full of light. It's working through them, it's working around them, so really just opting for 2 pigments right now, which is the titanium white and the Naples yellow, getting a good healthy mix of those two. And then I'm going to start working this in and around our main two clouds, which we can still see pretty well. And again, that's the beauty of acrylic. The first layer, it's kind of thin, so you can still see the sketch. And then I'm going to start bringing this down, having it work around this cloud, but for the most part, just creating this larger horizontal movement towards the base. And you can see I'm going over a lot of it, not once, but twice, to make it nice and thick. As we get over here, we should start moving into some of the blues. So we will grab a little bit of that cerulean blue, mix it with the Naples yellow. They will render somewhat of a green, but that's okay. We are going to desaturate it with a hint of oxide black, and the oxide black is going to make sure that the hues stay subtle as we need them to. Now, this, as you can see, is quite similar to the color we have for the sky, and we need it to be quite a bit darker. So I'm just going to begin with this, as it'll give us a nice blend out into here, but we are going to make adjustments. Just looking for a good initial transition from that gold into what will be our blue. So more blue, more oxide black. This time we're not adding in any extra Naples yellow. And that right there is pretty perfect. It's nice, it's moody. It looks like that of a sky after the storm. I'm just going to make the top of it lots of little rounded motions towards the openings in the sky that we've already established. So I'm using the corner of my brush, I'm doing little taps. We'll go back in for the real details relatively soon. But this is how we start. And again, we need it to get lost over here, so I'm going to apply less and less pressure. I'm going to create some lines that work their way over here, like so. And you can see that it slowly just gets lost as we move towards that right-hand side, because that right-hand side still has a lot of wet golden paint. And right now we're just essentially painting the bottoms of clouds that don't have as much light. And the little light areas in between are the sides of the clouds and the tops of the clouds that have a lot of light. Now, you don't want it to get too dark over here, so we're going to be careful. We're going to grab more of our initial mix, work that down into that which we've been working on, and then we'll have a new color for this setting. But this will be a nice safe pigment to start bridging that gap. Done all of this with a singular brush. We can switch to a liner for more details. We can switch to a filbert for soft edges, but you can also, if you work very intentionally, stick with a brush like this for your first layer. So far, I have to say, so good. Now I'm just going to trail this off into the background by doing a soft blend. That just means we're not looking for any hard edges in this. You avoid hard edges by doing very soft applications with minimal pressure. Now we're doing the side test, where we can see from this angle a little better if the layers are too thin, and the layers are actually quite thick because I went over them a couple of times, but remember, if yours is thin, do go and give it a second layer. It'll probably be even better for it. Now, before we jump into the details, we are going to render two clouds that are a little bit closer to us right here and here. These are going to have both yellow and blue. They're going to be relatively gray. Actually, a little bit brighter and a little bit warmer than what we have here. I always like to leave past mixes on my palette, that way I can use them as reference points. But as you can see, we're just recreating a nice new pigment, like so. Now we'll give this a test, and I'll be honest, I think we nailed it. I think this is perfect. So I'm just going to work this up, try to make my edges somewhat sharp and cloud-like, so lots of little protrusions, soft bumps towards the top, like that. We can have another one right through here, using the corner of the brush to get the details. You can see. Don't have to use the entirety of the brush. And then the one at the top that we really need to implement and do a good job on, because it's going to stand out next to the sky. This, of course, is our first layer. Our second layer will be a little bit thicker, a little bit more blue, a little bit more black. One more titanium white. We're going to work this towards the centers of them, because the centers are going to have a lot less light work through them, as they'll be somewhat thick. But the edges need to remain more of the warm golden hue. So we're trying to do a couple of things here. Transition it from one to the other. We'll make the edges much more golden in future layers with a more intentional brush. But as for getting started, I think that's quite nice. Let's double down one more time with the Oxide black into this top one, because it is closest to us, it is farthest away from the light, and therefore it will have the darkest body. Really like it. Great start as a whole. If you want, you can also take this and work it into this side. Create additional clouds that are kind of working through the back. You don't have to, but I do like this as a bottom and a back for a transition. It also makes things all a bit more cohesive, because now we have this color on the left and right hand side. But we're going to be doing a lot more with all of our highlights that'll make it cohesive. So don't feel like you have to do too much of this. From here, we're going to switch on over to the liner brush, and as you will soon see, we're going to make it nice and damp, which will condense our bristles and make a much sharper application. This is where the details get fun. Now we can start working with the real glow of the sun. We're using two pigments for this, titanium white and our Naples yellow, going for about an even mixture of the two. And it's also worth noting that my brush, my water, everything is entirely clean. That way I don't have to worry about the blues mixing in with this. Here we want to make it look like the edges of our clouds are just glowing. So we are going to work this around. It's a lot like just sketching in an outline, but it's not going to be a perfect outline. There are going to be areas that don't have it. There are going to be areas that drift off into the sky, like up here. I love that towards the tops of clouds, when they kind of find their way into the atmosphere, would let it dissipate with less and less pressure. I think that's always a really beautiful technique and application. You can have it wrap into the larger cloud a little bit here and there. And towards the bottom, I do this once I start to run out of paint, because I want this to be a little bit less stark when the cloud is going to have more light towards the top. Now, we're going to do this for a lot of our clouds. So we're going to move in Here we can separate this and this by just putting a line of highlight in between, and now we have two clouds instead of one. Again, once I start to run out of pigment, I'll go towards the bottom and do a little bit there. Now, just wetting my brush, grabbing more pigment, heading into this one, quite large, and this will be fun. There we go. Work this down. We can create lots of mini clouds amongst it. And this is where we build scale. This is where we build volume. By making small clouds, your regular clouds will look a lot bigger. And in a scene like this where we want things to look grand, that is important. Here we have some little brush strokes in behind that are a bit darker, which means we can turn those into clouds quite simply. In fact, a lot of your little mishaps with the brush can be converted into something rather convenient here. So I'm looking for little brush strokes that are horizontal, and I'm using this as an opportunity to turn them into something. Goes to show that even when you mess up with painting, you can rework it and make it something worth looking at. That said, I have a lot of clouds in this area. I'm just thinking about how I want it to continue evolving. I think I want this cloud to be a little more unique. So now we're separating this from this to a point. And as the clouds get farther away, they're going to get more simple. So the edges will get less detailed. And ideally a little bit smaller. If you can just apply a little bit less pressure with your brush, that'd be good. Also going in with just less pigment on your brush is pretty useful. I think I'm also going to create a larger wall of clouds up here. Let this blend its way down, and then we can go to the very top of it, make that a little brighter, similar to what we have around these. Beautiful. It's a bit of a softer line with this because it's farther away, and all of those bright hues are just blending into one another. That's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. Really enjoying this painting so far. I think we can also create some little clouds out here that are just golden, catching light in the distance. Little ones that don't necessarily have to be playing a big role. They're just showing the complexity of the sky and the scale. So very tiny little taps towards the top there. There we go. Now, I think what we're going to do is we're going to continue moving forward in the painting. Grab more of that pigment on my fairly damp brush. We'll double down on some of the highlights on the tops of these that we feel like are worth really investing in. There we are. And as for these, they too are going to have some highlight on the side of them, predominantly on the right-hand side of each protrusion because the majority of the light's going to be on this side of the painting. So here you can see I'm just, initially at least, applying it here, leaving this, leaving this, leaving this. And that's a good system to get started. Then we can start working our way in. Again, lots of little clouds that will also catch light and deserve attention. Following some brush strokes I have. This will look different for everyone because everyone will have different natural brush strokes inside, but we are just looking for those. We can also, if we want, bring some of this down into this larger area. So as you can see, we have these nice little micro clouds in the background now. Trying to make sure that the tops of them are all nice and bright. It's really easy to accidentally work inside and not get that top portion, but that top portion is the most important because that is where the light is hitting. So we're just going back, creating multiple layers, sometimes thickening things up, but every time I see a darker little line, I see that as an opportunity to create another new tiny cloud that's just going to build into what we want. And then, while we can really just add a highlight like this for hours, I think for balance's sake, we go up and we work on the larger clouds, and then we can come back down into these and do the finite pieces with all of it at the same time. Now, with this large area towards the top, we are going to work the edge first, which means the area with all of the light. So I'm grabbing an abundance of titanium white, our Naples yellow, our large flat-headed brush, and going to head in here using the corner of this brush to deliver all of these tiny little protruding portions that are working up here, catching light. Then we'll also work that from the top, like so. You can see in the reference there's a little bit of sky showing in between, so I'm going to try to capture that magic right here. Yeah, you can see how it just works its way in. And I'm going to work this highlight in as well for the beginning. And we're going to do a very simple large cloud to begin with, and then we're going to go back into it and make it detailed and far more interesting. But this does begin now with simply taking our current mix, interjecting a little bit of blue, a little bit of oxide black, just a hint of blue. We can add more blue as we get farther away from this edge, but to begin with, we're going to apply this right beside the gold. We're not applying it, we're not mixing it in with the gold yet, but we're getting it beside in all of our areas. That way the gold doesn't impact this mix as we move it around. And then, once we've fully worked around, then we are going to begin blending it into the rest of the painting. Much like that. Very good. We're going for a fairly soft look, so I'm using minimal pressure with my brush, but if you have brush strokes, again, it's a cloud. It'll just look like volume. And we're going to go back in with a lot more detail relatively soon. So don't worry too much about that. Now, we're going to darken this. Slightly more oxide black. Now we can have more of our cerulean blue. We still need titanium white to thicken it, to desaturate it. That's a good progression. Much like the last gray, we are applying this in full across before we blend it. Now that we've done that, now we can blend. Also, apologies if my hand is ever in the way of the camera. I'm fighting some dry time on this one, so I can't be as mindful as I'd like to be, but I am trying. I am trying to be mindful. Okay, now we're going to make the brush nice and damp. We're going to grab this color. We're going to start creating a more sharp base. It can blend its way into the cloud like that. You just want to make sure that that nice sky that you have down here, these nice clouds, are still being respected and well taken care of. So not a broad stroke through here, but a smaller intentional one. Then in this top corner, we are just going to get darker and darker. More oxide black, more cerulean blue, X-shaped pattern, and at this point we can go for the full blend. Again, there will be lots of clouds within this. It'll be much more detailed, but to begin with, this is what we're looking for. And to be honest, even without all the additional clouds, I think I like it already. I'm just going to offer a softer blend through here. I think I do want that to be darker. I think I actually want this to be darker than this, or this. So more oxide black, more cerulean blue. As it starts to dry, this will get easier and easier. But until it's dry, we'll be mixing with a lot of brighter pigment, which just means it's a more staggered transition, timing-wise anyway. Again, trying to be very intentional with moving into this space. More micro strokes. Okay, not bad, not bad. Again, darker. Also, apologies for the sounds outside. Always try to make these a nice relaxed experience, but it seems regardless of where I live, there are always exterior sounds. Back when it was near the country, it was lawnmowers, it was dogs, it was a wide variety of things. Here in the city, often cars, but regardless of where you are, life finds a way of showing up. And I think the trick is figuring out how to relax despite it, within it. There we are. Great start. I think we let this dry, and then we go in with a lot more of our volume, our detail. And I say all this. I think I'm going to grab a bit of it. I'm going to work it into the bottom here. Create that nice distinct line, really set of lines between this cloud that's closest to us and the clouds that are beneath it. Then we'll do a nice soft blend upwards. Much better. Much better. Now, up towards the top here, you can see a lot of smaller clouds that are in front of the larger one we just painted. So that is our next goal. Now we'll begin with a smaller flat-headed brush. I'm going to grab some of that titanium white and Naples yellow we are very well acquainted with. And I'm going to start re-sketching in some of the clouds that we had in our drawing. And we're just going to do the edge of this one to begin with. And then we're going to do the edge of the one that's right beside it. And we'll switch to a different pigment before we kind of commit to filling these in. Right now we're just kind of getting a feel for where they are, and And again, there's a nice little one through here. Doubling down on the edges so they're nice and thick. This one just kind of dissipates downwards until it gets lost. So, now that we have this, let's make a bluish gray version. A little bit of oxide black. So a good amount of titanium white. Hint of our cerulean. Just a hint. Very easy to add more cerulean than you want. So we try to be nice and careful with that. But now we can work this into the edge. And, as I say that, I think I do have too much cerulean. So what do? We add slightly more titanium white, oxide black. Just go back and forth until you get the pigment you really want. I'm a big believer in not just going for the first pigment you mix, but rather continuing to mix until you have the right pigment. We can go back into the center of this one. There we go. Have it work its way into this larger cloud. And now we can make that progressively darker and more blue as we get farther away from the light. And in theory, everything we just applied should still be wet, so we should be able to continue those soft blends. There we go. I'm going to do a bit of an X-shaped motion just so I can move paint around a little bit easier. And now we have a nice outline around this thicker cloud. I think we can do a lot more with it actually. So I'm going to create some lines over here for the back of the cloud. And then maybe it kind of gets lost through there. Now we'll just fill in the edges. Let it get darker towards that central area. So I'm trying to leave that almost untouched, and I'm doing a bit of a dry application. Here we can have more clouds, a different variety, and that can just be blended down. Right now I don't have a lot of pigment on my brush, but I do have a good amount of water, so I don't have to worry about too much color. You can also do a little bit of finger painting. I think we might open this up and just have a small portion of the sky showing through there. I can see just a hint of it in our reference photo, and I like it quite a bit. So that should be an easy, good addition. Now I think we can also bring a little more light through here. I think we'll actually darken the bottom of this cloud. When you're building out these details, it's a lot of going back and forth. Have this kind of run upwards. We blend the top, we leave the bottom to be sharp. Now it looks like we have another cloud behind this one. Very simple technique, very valuable technique. We can do that again, maybe right through here. Need it to be a little darker. We're trying to create these diagonal lines that work their way up, create separations. Have to be careful that we don't get too dark closer to here though, because of course that's where we have all the light from the clouds. There we are. Just smoothing things out. So far, so good. I think we'll switch on over briefly to the liner brush. Make sure it's nice and damp. We'll grab some of our white and yellow yet again. It's amazing what you can do with just really two colors, black and white, right? When you start working with subtlety, when you start trying to create the slightest variations of values and hues, you can accomplish some really wonderful things with a limited palette. This cloud's going to be brighter, so I'm just building back in those highlights into it, make it look a little more full. And then this one, I think, too. Through a lot of that blending, our initial applications got darker, which is okay. They let us reassess which ones we want to actually be brighter. And I know I want these to be. Just a little bit towards the top, but not too much. It's this bottom area. So far, so good. We can also do little flyaway clouds, which I always love, just ones floating in the sky. I think that always adds a lot of character. Again, scale as well. Now, I can add a hint of light back here because we're going to open this up. Add more sky to it. And I think I also have an opportunity to add some good highlight on top of this. Yeah, glad we tried it. Very glad we tried it. And just let it get lost as you move towards the back. And easy detail, easy additional detail. That's what that is right there. A lot of this moves in with the highlights. Very pretty. Very, very pretty. All right, now taking a look at it from a distance, I think, admittedly, this is looking a little bit awkward because this is void of detail itself. I think for this to make sense, this needs to be a lot more structured. It needs the minute applications of the liner. And we haven't done that yet. We just went in with the larger flathead. So I'm going to attempt to balance it before I continue to work on this, because I think it's pretty evident that both need to work together. And if I just move them farther apart from each other, stylistically, detail-wise, we're not really going to know how to work this area. So we're just bouncing back and forth, grabbing more pigment. Typically, I don't like to mix with the liner brush. However, we don't need that much paint, and we're not working with a complex color, so it's okay in this scenario. Or again, typically, I wouldn't be a big fan. I'm going to do little clouds breaching this area. I know you're also quite far away, and that's intentional because right now it's not so much about doing the detail of the edge of these clouds or even the edge of these clouds. It's about making it all fit together and make sense when you look at it farther away as a whole. That's the important part. So you are at a distance. I'm trying to paint a little bit farther away so that I too am at a distance. And then, in theory, we can figure out how to make this all work together. Very nice. Again, little strays out in the wild, out in the sky a bit. Doubling down on them, but trying not to make them all the same level of brightness. I think that's something I used to struggle with. When I painted the highlights on clouds, I would make them all so bright because I wanted it to feel so grand all the way through. But the issue with that is that then nothing ends up standing out and nothing ends up looking truly special. So the real way of going about it is picking a couple areas that you want to be truly bright, focusing on those, and then letting everything else kind of complement it along the way. Staggered approaches. That said, this is definitely working. That looks like it makes so much more sense now. Very relieved to see it. Also means we can go back and add some extra highlights to the sides of these. Something I wanted to do, but again, without knowing what this looked like, balancing it just didn't make sense yet. But now it does. And now we can. And so we are. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those crazy people who talks to their plants. Little affirmations and such. They say it's supposed to make your plants grow better. I don't know if that's true, but I do it anyway because, it's nice to put positivity out into the world. It's nice to manifest good things. And I feel like I do the same thing with paintings now, where I kind of talk to them along the way. So when I say things like, oh, it's beautiful, 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 it's not that I'm trying to compliment my painting. It's more that I'm telling my painting that I think that it's coming along nicely, and I believe in it, and we're going to get somewhere good if we just keep painting. So that's what I'm trying to do. Little bit by little bit. There we go. There we go. I like that. I think I'll make a white and gray. I don't think we need blue for this, to be honest. I'm going to make a white and gray for a little opening in the sky right up here. Just like that. But I think that's it. I think that's all I'm doing there. It's just a hint. It makes it dramatic. I like the hard edge. I think all of that works well. And then, I didn't mean for that to be that stark. And then I'm just going to continue wrapping this cloud up and around with the light. There we are. Okay. Now, I think I might change this up a little bit, shape-wise. We're really just playing at this point. But if you want to make it easy, again, the traceable for this is up over on Patreon along with the real-time drawing video. You can take that, you can copy it to your canvas. Even if you're mid-painting, you can copy it with a Conte chalk, redraw it on, and then just work from there. I'm being a little more playful, just because I enjoy the act of the problem solve. But again, if you really like your sky and you just want to put things back to where they should be, the traceable again is up over on Patreon, along with the real-time drawing video. That should make it all a lot easier for you. It's also worth noting that if you're up there, you can get my ebooks, which includes Acrylics for Beginners. So the essential is everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. You can also get hundreds of bonus painting lessons. And it's also just a great way to support the channel, if you can, if you care to. There's a link to it in the description. And of course, big thank you to everybody who is up over on Patreon, directly supporting the channel, making this happen. Could not do this without you. And this channel is predominantly community funded, so I do mean that quite fully. Would not be able to put the time in if it wasn't for you, so thank you. Okay. Slowly brightening up this cloud. It's a little more of a green hint hue in the back of it now, but I'm okay with that because it is in a darker area that is more saturated anyway. Yeah. Okay. We are getting close to a gorgeous cloud. Set of clouds. Sky of clouds. Just going to grab a little more gray and continue to work a bit of a highlight from here back up. Like that. Again, we have these lines down here that work so well, so we're trying to interject them towards the top. I think it's working. Do a little bit of a blend. Might have some clouds out here that are a little darker. Create a further separation. Additional little details in the back. I think those worked out well. Towards the top here, I think we can have a little bit less of a stark transition. So I need a gray that's lighter than this, but darker than our highlight. I'm just looking on my palette for a neutral gray. I found one that I think if we make it a little bit brighter, we add a little bit more yellow, it'll be perfect. And that right there is what I'm looking for. This is also going to make the cloud look a little more voluminous because it'll have light wrapping its way around it. Like that. See? More depth. And it's okay to have just the thin line of light, but you want a combination of that and this rolling gradient, because the rolling gradient will show depth and size, where the line will make it look sharp and dramatic. So again, we find our ways to both. There we are. Now, when we look over at these clouds in comparison to the others, I think they are looking a little underdeveloped. So we're going to head in here, just add some extra little portions that break off, have light. We're not adding a dramatic amount of detail, but we're adding just enough that it starts to feel like the rest of the painting. So little taps, of course, we're going to blend portions of it back and just continue to wrap light around our subjects. Already, I think that's much, much stronger. The top can also definitely be improved with a similar set of applications, making the edges brighter, bringing some of these lines inwards, softly blending, occasionally finger painting. But I also think the far edge right here could use a lot more light. And I have to say, this took some real time, this took some real love, but if you take that time and love and you put it into it, I do think you can render a really wonderful, complex sky. I think this one was particularly exciting because it was just so complex. It was a fun challenge, and we'll probably go back to it once we establish the waves, but I figured for this painting, because our subjects are so detailed, so complex, I'd try to break it up into a couple of pieces. I'd like to note that there is a new pigment on the palette. You can see it right here. And this is a turquoise green. And this is going to be for the areas of the waves that are a bit higher that catch a lot of light through them. So that is going to be done with a pigment from Amsterdam, though you really can use any variation of just brighter bluish green, anything akin to it. You can even add just a bright green to your cerulean blue and you'll have a similar effect. So don't feel like you need that specific pigment, but it is the one I'm working with here today. Now, we are going to begin in the water in the background, as we typically do, work our way forward, and I am going to begin with the larger flat-headed brush. Now this one is damp, that way we can keep our bristles a bit more condensed, our pigment a bit more wet, and we are going to begin back there with not the brightest pigment, but more so a mid-gray that has hints and hues of the blue and a tiny bit of our turquoise. Now here we'll mix this up. I think we go a little bit darker, a little bit more gray. This is one of those situations where you're going to feel inclined to use more saturation than you should. So I would go in with a very measured approach, a little bit darker than you think, a little bit less saturated, and then you can brighten things, you can saturate things with the second layer. But for now, just going in very simply, cutting across the top. You can see that I'm using lots of little markings rather than one continuous one. It's going to give us a slightly more natural looking edge. It almost looks like there are slight waves on the horizon. It's not perfect, it's not meant to be. That could look a little synthetic. So we're just trying to keep that looking natural. Now I can see that I have some drawn in waves. I'm going to avoid the tops of them. I'm going to work around them. And instead, I'm going to work in all other directions. So there's the wave. You can see how we maneuvered that. We'll move this down slightly over this wave, that way we can paint this wave on top of the backing water. All of my strokes in the end are smoothed out with horizontal movements. That way we don't have to do additional brushwork. This brushwork will be fantastic for creating those leading lines and just making the waves feel as if they're moving in the way we want them to. We have another wave right through here. It's a rather large one, but the bottom of it is still going to be this blue. And as you can see, I run out of the actual pigment. This gets a lot more thin. And this looks very different than this, despite the fact that they are the same color. This one looks more bright, it looks more saturated. That just happens when you're using more water in your mix than paint. So we definitely need to go in and do a second layer. Now, you could wait till this fully dries to go over it again. However, I do have a good amount of paint still on my palette that I want to use before it dries up. So I'm actually just going to go in when it's semi-dry and apply the second layer. I tried to put you on the side there so you could really see the difference. Sometimes you see the thinness of paint differently from various angles. So we're just switching the angle to make sure that that's a relatively good view. And I think you can see things fairly accurately. But that is essentially our second layer. Went on even easier than the first, and that makes sense. We had a little bit of practice. We know where we're going. We've warmed up actually applying paint. And now it's time to start working a little bit on the waves and the openings that we have for them. As I mentioned, the top of the wave is going to have a lot more of our turquoise green in it. So we'll interject that into the mix, a little bit of our titanium white. We don't want this to be too bright. We still want to interject it into the grayish blue because we're going to save the brighter hues for our true foreground. But for now, we can work this in towards the top of these waves, start to bring it down into the negative space, as you can see. And then you can softly blend it by using very little pressure with your brush into the open space. This is a lot easier when this is all still wet, so ideally we're doing this while it is wet, at least a little bit. Here, we'll move this up, back down into the wave, this larger one, which will overlap it. And we're going to have some very basic, very preliminary waves to begin with, but that's what we're looking for. That's what we want. Head up here to the top. Just going to check my reference photo. Okay, we're doing a good job. We're doing a good job. I like that. And we're just eliminating the white of the canvas through some of these. You can even expand this wave over a little bit, interject some areas of light, and if you feel like there's too much of that light green, you can go back to the original color, work that up into the waves, and this can be a good way of just moving some line work in there as well. Here you're going to see me doing a little sweeping motion from the bottom upwards, and then you're going to have slight lines that work their way up and down the wave, which will make it look like water is rolling over itself. It's the first detail of many. It's a little one, but it's going to create a nice foundation for the rest of them. So you see that? Lots of little lines. Grab more pigment. And you can see 3 large markings. Now we're going to break them down into smaller ones. Slight blends. There we go. And they should get more steep as they get closer to the teal area. Very nice. Now we'll get a little bit closer yet again. And we're going to switch over to our liner brush. Great for detail work. We used a lot in the sky, and now we're going to use it to combine both the more gray and the more green areas to create something we can render some nice details with, because these larger waves will run off and create smaller little ones. We're going to have bite-sized areas of raised water throughout. It's not going to be as bright, which is why we're mixing it with both the darker and the lighter pigment, but we can start connecting it to other ones. And the idea here is that we're creating lots of little Z shapes. So the water goes up, it goes back down, goes back, and then you can take the tops of all of those points and use them to create additional little waves. But in theory, they can all kind of connect with each other and lead up into the larger ones. I think subtlety is key. We start with more subtle applications, and then as it dries, as we learn the actual color, we can double down in one direction or another. As for the background, we're going to do really small ones, if not just horizontal lines, because we want some detail back here, but it really shouldn't be prominent. And as it dries, it will give us a better indicator of how it actually looks, because right now it's very all reflective. So you don't see the pigment as it actually is. But we will in a couple of minutes. Okay, now I've let everything fully dry, and as you can see, some of the markings are quite subtle. This is fine because we can always go back and do more. I'm going to do a lot of the mixing yet again with my larger flat-headed brush. Grab some blue, some turquoise, and I want a decent amount of this because we are going to continue painting a lot of waves. That said, it's a beautiful, vibrant teal. I don't know that we're even going to work up to that. Something that we have to consider is our sky and the vibrancy in there, and if the sky isn't that vibrant, we can't have the waves being significantly more so. Making things cohesive is definitely a primary objective when painting realism or something akin to it. But with that, we're going to test this on the top of our wave, and as you can see, it is brighter than what we were working with. So I'm glad that we tested it first, and we can actually use this on those top areas because we are going to have slightly more light work their way through, and then we can go back to mixing and get what we were looking for the details in between the waves. Said, this is a nice addition, and it's one of those things where you might not always get the perfect color immediately, but the imperfect colors could be used elsewhere. They could improve the painting in other ways, and just keeping an open mind to that I think is really important. That said, I feel like often when I paint, I tell you that we're having one of those days where there are clouds and then there's sun and there's clouds, and I'm kind of battling light throughout the entirety of the day when the sky honestly looks akin to this. But today I'm happy to announce that it is perfect. It is just a clear skied day. Love painting on these, and I'm trying to remind myself, you know what? This is a perfect day to paint. I'm very grateful. And I hope you're enjoying. I hope you are excited for your painting day, and that you feel like you're learning some things as well. Now here we grade it down a little bit, not dramatically, but hopefully enough that when we go in here to re-interject our waves, things will just flow. You can see how we're doing the tops for the most part. Then we'll do little lines that lead up into this wave, and they get more steep as we get higher up into it. Then we can do little taps in the negative space, because all large waves are made up of lots of little moving pieces of water as well, right? Grab some more, head on over here. Trying to keep you relatively far away for this first application, just because I want you to see what it looks like holistically rather than thinking too much about the details at this point, because right now we're really just trying to plot our subjects. We're not making things too detailed. We're not focusing on realism to a large extent. We're just getting our movements and our basin. I like this. I'm having a lot of fun here. Okay. Now we will get a bit closer since we have our foundation, and you can see that we're going to continue creating minute markings in between those larger movements, in between those larger waves. And we'll double down on these many a time with much brighter, much more powerful values, but right now we're trying to get that movement, and you're almost doing so through, if you've worked like this before, pointillism, where you're moving the eye through dots. Now ours aren't just dots, a lot of them are little taps and drags, but we are trying to lead the viewer's eye. We are trying to do so through lots of small markings. More horizontal ones in the far distance because you just won't see the detail. That's another important thing to note. As we get closer to the foreground, you see more detail. So subjects look like they have more unique shapes. In the background, our eyes kind of compress things to be hyper simple. And that's why here it is just horizontal lines back and forth. There are waves there. We're just not seeing them at that distance. Now from here, we'll move on over to the other side of the canvas. Take that idea and just continue to work those minute markings into our negative space. We can also double down on the movements we do really like. It's all about finding your balance, right? There we go. Beautiful. It's getting to that point where you see the vision start to unwind. That idea that you have in your head, it's coming through. And it just gets you more and more excited to paint. Even more. I think a lot of things in life are like that. You get started and you've already won. Getting started's the hardest part. Just getting some paint down. And then once you have, you find a success here, a success there, and those successes, they keep you moving. They inspire you to do more. You just have to do enough in the beginning to land that train of inspiration, right? That's how I try to look at it. That's how I try to get started. When a painting seems a little intimidating. Now if I just begin, I'll get there. That said, again, good start. With that, from here, we get to begin on some of the waves that are capping, that are almost exploding in light. And that means interjecting a lot more titanium white into our mix, just like so. A hint more gray. So we need the Oxide black. But this will be a lovely addition, which we are going to apply yet again with our liner brush. Now, typically, we're going to have these very bright values towards the tops of our waves. So we have one back here, as we know. And I'm just checking my reference photo. Yeah. So, light's coming from behind it, which means the top of it is going to be the brightest. And just going to create almost a line towards the top. You don't really want to outline things in painting, but here it is backlit, so we're going to have a lot of light working its way through the top. I'm doing lots of little taps, occasional drags. I'm missing areas very intentionally. We don't want to fill out the entirety of it or it will look unnatural. And then it'll kind of explode up at the top because that's where the water is breaching. Very good. And then we have some smaller little breaches back here. It's not just one breach, it's not one just explosion of water, sometimes it's multiple. And so we have these, and then I do little taps to bring a lot of that highlight down and inwards, like so. Now let me get you a lot closer as we get into the actually detailed portion of this technique. Now, on second thought, because this is so much in the distance and we're not entirely sure how much detail we want to allocate to it first, once we have that little highlight kind of caressing the top back of it. We're going to move on to these because they're a little bit closer and they will require more detail. And I want to see how much detail we can fit in them with this size of canvas, so I know how much I can do in this one, because I don't want to accidentally do more in this than these or the same amount. And by doing these first, we'll just have a better idea. So a little reprioritization. We'll grab our liner brush, which is of course nice and damp. We'll apply this towards the top of our wave to be. We do have some larger splashes in the reference, and then it kind of comes back down, and then we have some rolling portions to the wave. But I think the big thing I'm noticing is that I need this to be a little bit brighter, so I'll interject some extra titanium white, maybe a little bit more of that turquoise pigment, and then of course we're back to the liner. Now, have those big highlights towards the top. Remember, we're not making solid lines, we're making areas with openings that feel lively and jump. Then it can come down a little bit. Then we're back into our rolling areas. I'm going to see a lot of the water really work its way into this active top before falling back down through here. But some of this will roll over, so I'll have some of it falling as well. All of this is done with intention. I think that's the big thing to note here. We're making a lot of little taps and a lot of little markings, but they all have a goal. Now we're back up with this, and then we're back down, but then there's more right behind it that's also up. And a lot of this is actually a falling water. It's a larger wave which is moving down and eventually crashing into this wave, which we can then just sketch the bottom of. Right now we're lucky in that our pigment is very watery, so it's easy to see and discern. But I'm going to fill in most of this with that highlight because it's going to be foamy, it's going to be a lot brighter. It'll be a lot brighter than the actual wave. We just want to make sure that this all connects properly. And now it feels a bit more three-dimensional. It's lacking a lot of depth because we still need various values within it, but it's a strong start, and that I'm excited about. We're going to do the same to the back here while we have that same pigment on our brush. So we start with the little taps, and again we have this big rupture towards the peak. And then it comes down, and you can actually see a little bit of the darker wave behind it before it comes up and erupts again. This is going to make it look a bit more unique from what we have here, which is important. But all of this is also foaming, coming down, and making a splash within the water towards the base. Always evolving. No two waves are going to look the same. That's an important lesson. And up here, we do have some level of falling water, but I don't want too much because I don't want it to interrupt this wave. It kind of ends up back there. Now when we add different highlights to this, it'll look a lot better. But as far as a start goes, I think this is fantastic. There we are. Okay, now that we've done the base for these, I think we can head back over here and have some additional falling water. I'm going to change from what we have in the reference photo to a bit more of a conventional fall, because I want this to have a lot of leading lines that push the eye towards this wave. So we're just going to do some taps, make that foaming, erupting area, but it's not going to be too complex. It's really just working its way from the top down through here. You want some areas of your painting to be hyper detailed and unique. You want some to be a bit more predictable and easily understandable. And the goal is to create a flow of those, right? You don't want too much of one, not enough of the other. It's about a balance. And I think by having this a bit more of a generic wave that just brings the eye in here, we ensure that the eye doesn't get too confused, especially with all of the detail up in the sky. Now I'm just going back in with lots of little taps, trying to ensure that that which is falling and crashing is looking correct. We can update some of these other waves through here. Just build on those values. Maybe we create some little lines that work their way up the wave just to create some additional movement. But all in all, I think the three of them work quite well together now. So at this point, we want to let them dry decently, and then we're going to go back in with a much brighter pigment. Okay, so after taking a step back and letting this dry, I really looked at the reference photo and I realized a lot of the foam from the waves towards the top isn't actually this greenish hue. It's more of a grayish cerulean. So I'm going to make my next application a little bit brighter, as we talked about, but I'm going to move more in the direction of the cerulean than our turquoise. So we're just going to work our way into the pigments we have with new updated hues. We still need a little bit of our oxide black to turn it into a gray, because we're not going too bright too fast. We don't want it to be too saturated. There's an in-between here which will work wonders for us. And as you can see, it's still quite bright. We might push it into the darker area and then re-brighten it. But I'm comparing it against what we've just been working with towards the side. I'm trying to keep some of that there so I have that constant reference point. All in all, I think this will be a fantastic color for a lot of what we have in terms of foam. And you can apply it with this into the larger areas. But I think I'm going to switch back to the liner for the majority of it. And for the record, this isn't the real highlight. We need lots of minute little micro adjustments before we get to where we really want to go. And this is just the first of many. So right now we're layering on our new blue for the foam. And I will say I'm already much happier with this. It's amazing how just a slight change in your hue can have a massive difference in how you feel about the painting as a whole. It also has the benefit of it being a different value and that it's a little bit brighter, so we are creating additional depth with it. But I do think it looks almost like a different subject. And differentiating the wave from the foam, I think, can be pretty dramatic for your success. Like that. I think we'll head on over to the other one, looking nice and subtle in the background. This one doesn't have too much of this foam, but it does, again, fall quite simply in front. No particularly wild movements, but reliable and quite nice. There we go. Okay, and now we can take that same pigment and we can start working a little bit of that foam down into our waves. And I like to do this with these little tap and drag effects. But this is going to make it really start to look like water in the ways that we want it to. So as you can see, I'm following a lot of the waves, the movements we've already created, working our way up. From here we can work it down, kind of creating these maps or veins through the water. Easy ways to think about it. But that foam doesn't just exist towards the top of the wave, it exists throughout our seascape. It's going to make our water significantly more detailed and as a whole, just much more aesthetic. You'd have to be careful with it in the background because it is quite bright. I'm going to switch to these horizontal markings and just be quite controlled. But again, good steps in the right direction. Now we're a bit farther back, so these markings are going to be smaller than they were before. But the same rules apply. We're moving up and down our waves, finding areas that foam would just travel with the wave, because it's really just following the water if you think about it. There we go. Nice and choppy, as it should be. This water is very choppy. Not a still day on the ocean. There we go. Just watched the Odyssey. And I have to say, the way water is done in that is just incredible. It feels monumental. It feels so grand. And, you know, that's art. Film is art. Being able to render the feeling that nature can bring about is just, that's a talent. And we're trying to do something similar here. I didn't realize that this scene, when I initially started painting this, would look so much like the ocean from the Odyssey, but I think it really does. We're working with the right palettes, these grand waves, very dramatic, fit with it, and such an incredible story. Such an incredible telling. If you haven't seen the Odyssey, I strongly recommend it. Always try to see all the Christopher Nolan, all the Denis Villeneuve films. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's just some directors where it doesn't really matter what they're making. I'll go and I'll give it a try. Certainly was not disappointed. That said, we do need much greater highlights for these peaks now. So I'm going to grab some additional titanium white, work that into our mix. I'm going to make sure my brush is nice and damp. That'll make the pigment that we had a bit more alive, and it'll make this blend easier. We still want it to be gray. We just want it to be a brighter gray. That's quite nice. Let's give it a go. Switching back to the liner. And now, again, we go towards the top of the wave. Have all of this water spilling out and over. And it's working its way in just a little bit. And we have more towards the back. Remember that these waves are backlit, so we are going to continuously try to put more light towards the back of them. Let me get you a bit closer though. Okay, so as we've talked about, we have all of this water which works its way down, and typically when it does, it creates these lips towards the bottom. You kind of follow the edge, and it just looks like water's working its way out. Now the water is also falling, so we're going to make movements that accentuate that idea along with our taps, leaving some of the last blue showing through because we want that depth. Not all of the water is going to be the same value. There we go. Very nice. We can add just a hint of this highlight into the foam down here. Not too much, but enough to generate slightly more depth. And this isn't going to be the final highlight, but you do want to start treating it carefully because we are running out of room to make things more highlighted. There we go. Beautiful flow to it. You really just feel like you get lost in that and feel it work its way around you. More taps towards the top. Again, little peaks. There are multiple of them. Taps throughout the body of the wave that's crashing down. These little taps are going to be a great detail. You don't want to overdo it, but I think they add a lot to the painting when worked with intentionally. So it's worth noting that these are not our primary waves. These are waves in the background, so they shouldn't be the most detailed thing ever. We're just trying to make them look real enough. We can go back and add detail later if we have room to, once we do the big wave. Let's start working on this one or the other. Now here we have a wider view, just so you can see the variance from all of them as we add these details and just the difference this does make in the painting. Because I think often when we hyper-focus on just one, it's easy to forget how much we've already done, how much it impacts it compared to the others, and then overdo it. But when you take these steps back and you really look at your canvas, you can see, oh no, that's actually quite impactful. I think most of us steer ourselves into doing too much rather than too little, which is always funny, because then we spend more time going back and correcting things, which also isn't a bad idea. You know, I've been asked before, how do I know when a painting's done? And at different points in my painting journey, I've said, I know my painting's done because I've done everything I wanted to do, and then I went and I did more, and then I didn't like what I did, and then I went back and I fixed it, and I brought it back to where it was. And then I know because I've done everything I wanted to, I've explored my extra ideas, I know what works, I know what doesn't work, I don't have any questions in my head of, oh, what if I did this, what if I did that, because I did it. And then I go back to where that happy medium was, that correct amount. It's not always intuitive without doing it, but if you do it, then you know. Now that's a lot of extra work, because you're redoing a great number of portions of your painting. So it's not something I'd always recommend, but if you really love a piece, if you really want to figure out the ending of it, I just kind of keep going until I do more than I should, and then I work it back and have it the way that I want to again. I think that wave right there is quite nice. Now we're going to go back here. Again, this one is the easiest. Lots of taps, but they're kind of just folding over in a conventional way. There we go. And we'll incorporate a slight amount of this highlight into the waves and the foam themselves. Just little bits. We're not applying the highlight to all of the foam, to all of the highlight, to all of the already raised and protruding areas. We're being selective, and that's getting us places. Now yet again, we go back to the palette, and we're going to make an even brighter pigment yet again. So we are switching to the large flat-headed brush. We're grabbing some extra titanium white. We're working that into the mix. We might grab a hint of our Oxide black, just a hint, to keep it nice and gray. And this is our next pigment. You can see that it's not a pure white, but it is getting brighter than that which we've been working with. Now, you'll never guess, but we're working with the liner brush yet again, the classic. You can see this is, in fact, a lot brighter. So we're going to use this, I think, just around the edges. Could we use it on the inside to a point? Sure. But I really do want the edges to feel backlit, to feel like there's an immense amount of light, and then therefore there's this glow that emanates around the wave. So we're just being mindful. Just being mindful. And now, this wave I think looks like it has a lot more depth than this one, which speaks to the fact that our goal worked and we succeeded. It also means that we now have to make sure the rest of the painting fits within this strategy. There we go. And then we'll head on over to the other side too. And I always feel so relieved when we make it over here because it means we did everything else pretty well, and this is kind of our victory lap, if you will. There. I think we bridge our waves to a point. Have this continue over to the other side. And we're going to have a lot more light in the background so we can do some extra horizontal lines and whatnot through here. I like that. I really like that. It's not perfect yet, but we're making good progress. Now, once we have that applied and dried, we are going to take yet another step back, look at all of it together, make sure that it's flowing, make sure that each wave looks different from the next. And once we're sure we're happy with the general forms, we're going to do a big step, which is take some of our Naples yellow, something we haven't used since the sky. We'll take some titanium white, try to get some clean titanium white. There's a lot of blue mixed in with ours, but I'm trying to get a very intentional amount. And then we're going to take this and we're going to do that same technique over our wave where we're redoing the edge with a lot of minute taps. That way, that golden light is truly working its way through the top of the wave. And this is going to hopefully add a nice diffused glow to portions of our water. There we are. Subtle amount to begin with. As we've talked about many a time, we don't want to overdo these things. Now we'll grab more. We'll head on over to this side. It's a bit farther away from the light, but it still will be affected. And I know you're quite far away from the canvas right now. That is intentional because this is such a subtle application. You want so little of it that I just want you to see the effect from a distance. Because it's more about the feel than the technique. You've done the technique, you know the technique, you just did the technique repeatedly with the blues. But this is about interjecting warmth, atmosphere. There's golden hues from above. You know? You know. So far, so good. Now, typically when you work with yellow and blue on the same brush with the same water, you have to be really careful because they turn into greens. Now here, we're okay, because if we get a green, well, we have green in the water. But more so than that, why I'm really secure about this and why I didn't tell you you have to, absolutely have to go and clean your brushes in water, is because Naples yellow and the greens we selected, or the blues we selected, don't typically blend easily. If you want to get a green out of them, yeah, you have to really try. So here, we're a lot safer in applying this than a cadmium yellow. Naples yellow is a beautiful, safe yellow to use with seascapes, I find. So, if you haven't been using Naples yellow in your seascapes, I strongly recommend it. It's a nice subtle color to go with subtle gray waves, but it's also a safe color to not end up with a fully accidentally green painting. There we go. Can add a little bit of that highlight to some of your backing waves, the larger ones, the tops of them. I'm doing it like I did a lot of the other highlights, in that it's a broken tap. Minute drags occasionally, but nothing dramatic. Nothing dramatic. Beautiful. Honestly, I think we have a lot of room to play, but I also think for where we are in the painting, we're right where we should be. You know? Like, there are definitely things that could be done, but I don't think they should be done until we've established this to some greater degree. Because it's going to be the real foreground, what's really meant to grab our attention, and it will dictate a whole lot more. As an update, we talk about fixing little things, doing minute pieces so that we don't have to go back and do a lot. Something I do want to go back to is in areas like this, I want to re-interject just a darker blue to create more of a separation between the foam and the wave. So I'm just going to recreate some of that darker bluish green that we had previously. We'll try this, and I'm going to make the markings move down in the way that the wave barrels. So that was a good color match, but we want it to be darker, so we'll interject more of that, maybe a little more cerulean. Oh yeah, that's what I'm looking for. That's perfect. It'll create some more motion, and in general, I think this will separate more of our painting in the ways that we want it to. You can see again, I'm adding it behind, or under rather, a lot of the falling wave. And then we have the little highlights that work through it too. So neither of which is all the way through, but they both kind of work in conjunction with each other. And this is one of those things you can go back and forth on for hours until you get the blend that you really want. Don't feel like you have to make it look exactly like mine. Do feel welcome to take your artistic liberties. But I will say, I think that looks better. And then we'll add some extra light just peering through the middle with our most green hue. Titanium white, a little bit of cerulean, hint of oxide black. Again, not doing too much because it's a very strong saturated pigment, but just wanting to show some of those deeper hues working their way through the center of the wave and just the center. Yeah. Also need to be cohesive, so we'll just work it through here a little bit too. It's okay if it's subtle. It's okay if it's a little ambiguous in the background. There we are. Okay, now it is a brand new day, as you might be able to tell from the lighting, but that means everything is entirely dry to the touch, and I have to say, it's so nice waking up, looking at a painting like this, and just feeling like you are moving in the right direction. I think that in itself can be so motivating, and we were just talking about that, the idea that, you know, once you do get started, once you do start to feel those little wins, it does just get so much easier. So I'm excited to jump back into this today. I'm going to begin by adding some extra highlight glow to the tops of the waves that we have, and for that, I'm just going to take our liner brush, a little bit of our Naples yellow, titanium white, render quite a bright mixture, something akin to what we have in the sky. And we'll just double down on the highlights that we've pre-established through some of these. And our initial marking was quite bright. It was a very similar mix. However, because we are working with acrylics, the initial markings are going to be relatively semi-transparent, especially when you're working with water, and especially when you're going over darker subjects like that of the water that we have. So multiple layers for true brightness, and that's a-okay. Again, it just kind of gives you more time and opportunity to really assess what you want to do with it and ensure that it's moving in the direction you want it to. We're definitely doing the right things with this one. So we're doubling down. I also feel like sometimes sleeping on a painting can be really, really beneficial. Just taking that time to digest it, come back, look at it with fresh eyes. I think we all get painter's vision after a certain amount of time, and that's essentially just when you look at something great that you made and you say, oh, I don't like that. Sometimes we just get a little too close. We see flaws that aren't really there, and taking that step back and then reapproaching it can be so valuable for just the mental health of it all. And again, mental health wise, today, I'm waking up and I'm feeling really good about this. I'm also going to double down on some of the highlights in the back because they are closer to the light. So just reestablishing little movements, little waves, Trying to go over pre-established ones, the tops of them that are the brightest points. We don't want to bring it too much into the foreground, but we can do hints here and there, right? So far, so good. Okay, I like that. I like all of that. Maybe a little more light on the right-hand sides of our splashing waves, just to double down on that idea that they are three-dimensional, and that light will be working, wrapping around them. We don't want to do too much though, because there just won't be that much. And that's okay. That is okay. Beautiful. Great start. Now, I think what we're going to do is we're going to re-establish some of the foam that we have in between the waves, because these are all quite bright. We have a dramatic contrast with them, and I like that, but it should be a little bit more cohesive in between the mid areas. So I'm going to get you closer, and then we'll continue working on that. Now for this, we are going to stick with the liner brush. I'm going to grab some of our Cerulean blue. Remember, all of this is fully dry. Grab a little bit of our titanium white, hint of our oxide black. We want this to be bright, so it is just a hint of the oxide black. But we don't want it to be a blue, we want it to be a gray. And that's why we need the oxide black in the mix. So we're just going to go back and forth a couple of times till we get what we really want. And that right there, that's pretty perfect. So now we're going to take the excess off our brush, make sure the brush is damp, grab some pigment, and now we just work our way in between the waves. Create more little Zs. All of that nice connective tissue that leads from one to the other. And I'm doing this all with taps rather than elongated lines, because realistically, a line would look too smooth for choppy water. So instead we try to break it up. Make it feel like there are little splashes amongst the movements. We can double down on the bigger areas that we feel are going to be more impactful. But as a whole, I think this is pretty good. You can see I'm making the backsides that are catching more light a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more full. And it's one of those processes that doesn't take a lot of work, but it has a big impact. They should get smaller as we get farther out, bigger as we get closer to us. Though, you know what? Balance is key, and if we're not balancing the other side of the painting with this, we're not going to end up with a great painting. So we are going to move the camera. We're going to work a little more on this side. Yeah, you can really see the difference when we take a step back between here and here. This just feels so much more voluminous, so much more powerful, and that's how these waves, this water should feel. So we'll just start re-interjecting. There's little spots. The builds, the crashes, the fun stuff. Yeah, that matches that now, where this is the next spot of effort. With this one, a good portion of this will be a little bit darker because, of course, we'll have shadow from the actual wave, but there will be portions that come up, come back down. We can even work this up into the wave to a point. More taps. I like that. I do like that. It's also worth noting that we're still working on the little waves. The big wave, the detailed wave, is yet to come. So everything we're doing, we get to intensify, we get to build out, we get to add more detail. But as far as starts go, I think this is a great one. Okay, now to take a step back and assess, I think we have a beautiful balance of detail within the sky and this first area of water here. That is exactly what we're looking for, something that feels cohesive, something that feels like there's a rhythm of movement and volumes, because this is a very voluminous sky. So we want a fairly voluminous piece of water as well, just to match that. It doesn't feel like one portion of the painting is heavier than the other, if that makes sense. Of course, we want balance, and for some areas to be very heavy, we need some to be slightly less, but I think this is going to be quite dramatic. So that's how it should be. And again, at this point, I think we're doing quite well. With that, we are going to move on to this next, I guess, the biggest piece of the painting. There are some areas below it that are also going to be very detailed and frame it, but this next part, this is going to be very fun. Okay, now the question, how do we begin such a large subject? How do we begin on the subject which is going to make the piece the piece? And often the answer to that is you begin simply by blocking things in, simple shapes, then you add your textures, your gradients, your details. But it begins with something much more simple. Now, I've drawn a lot of complexities into this, that way I have a good understanding of how the subject should look long term. I think the more you familiarize yourself with your subject, the better you'll do at actually rendering it correctly. So I always go in and I try to sketch it to the best of my ability. And it's also worth noting, for those of you who are up over on Patreon, you can download the traceable for this. That can be useful for, again, familiarizing. But in addition, once we paint that base layer, if you want to go back and re-interject these details over top of it with a Conte or a chalk, you can do that. That'll make painting the details, again, a little bit more of a relaxed process if you are somebody who kind of struggles with placement, scale, or drawing in general. That said, we're going to take a look at the reference photo to see what this is going to look like, and also our first steps in breaking it down. Also note, you can get the reference photo up over on Patreon, along with the traceable and the real-time drawing videos. Also, this video ad-free. That's a big benefit. But if you look at the top, you can see all of this beautiful green teal light. That'll be right through there. And then it goes into this much darker, fairly deep looking bed of water. And with this, we want it to remain relatively saturated. I know it looks darker, but it isn't a black and it isn't close to that. It still has a lot of hue in it. We're going to try our best to render that. And as you get into the bottom, we re-enter that area of teal, but then as you get farther away from the actual wave, it goes more into the cerulean. So we want a lot of brighter teal through here, and then it's going to get a bit more dark but retain saturation, and then it's going to get brighter in the teals, and then they're going to transition to the ceruleans. The top of this wave has a lot of that teal, but it's darker, more so akin to this than this. And then it gets this cerulean slash teal highlight when the wave is coming down and crashing. So we're going to do a lot with subtle color change.
And once that's implemented, we can go in and we can add all of the fun details that you can see, the splashing water, all of that. Also worth noting, the foam should be more of a cerulean mix, and we'll just bounce between our blue and our green mixes. I'm going to put my reference photo back on top of the easel. It's typically where I keep it, just so I can keep track of what I'm doing. And because this is such a large area, we are back to the larger flat-headed brush. We will be returning to the liner brush, but we are going to be retiring it for some time now. With that, again, we're going to begin at the top of our wave with a nice teal, titanium white, a little bit of cerulean blue, but not a grand amount, and a little bit of our oxide black. Because while this is bright, it's not that bright. It's just bright comparatively to all the things around it. And we'll just start by placing that in here. Start working it down. I'm trying to put in a thick amount of pigment because we are working with acrylics. This will innately be somewhat thin. Now we're going to grab a little bit of water. We're going to create a brighter variant, a slightly more saturated variant of this, like so. Get a good consistent mix. We're going to place that right on top, and we're going to blend it down to the best of our ability. So it's brighter at the top, and then it gets to more of your general value. Under that, as we noted, we should get darker, but retain saturation. So I'm going to add more of that teal, more of our oxide black, a little bit of our cerulean. We're just going to go back and forth. And the more we mix oxide black and our blues or teals together, the less titanium white is going to be in the mix. Oh, that's beautiful. Such a rich color. I'm going to apply it across the base, the deepest area first, and then carefully going to start blending it up into the pigment we already have at the top. We're going to be careful with this because it'll be really easy to overdo one or the other. I'm using the side of the brush so I can get these little protrusions up and down. Now I'm going to wash my brush, make it relatively clean, but a little bit damp. I'm going to go from the top, again, clean brush. So I shouldn't be moving any of this dark pigment into the light. Just going to bring that back down. I'm going to clean my brush. Go from the top, bring that back down, clean my brush. Top, back down, clean my brush. You see there's a pattern here. And now we have a soft transition from one to the other. This looks a little bit brighter than it should because it's wet, it's reflective. But we are going to double down on the darker value within it. More oxide black. We're going to place that down towards the base. Make this have some additional depth. There we go. And now we're going to do the opposite of what we just did, in that we're going to go from the base up, clean the brush, go from the base up, clean the brush. And this way we're not moving too much of that bright pigment back into the very bottom of this. Apologies if my hand gets in the way here and there. This is just one of those processes where you have to go on a certain angle, and just trying to make sure I do the best job I can. And now we're creating some inconsistencies, but intentionally. As we get towards the bottom here, we're going to want to let it spill out and return to more of that nice teal. So we're going to interject some teal into it. Create a nice little line across the base of where the water becomes the water again in the way that we know it. you're just going to use the brush to move back and forth between the two. And your liner brush will do a lot of the connective tissue later on. But for now, we have this swooping motion with lots of little brush strokes, very soft ones at the top because of the technique of moving the brush over and then taking the paint off. And then down here it's going to get a bit more choppy because we have that choppy water. It's less condensed and uniform. Here it's a little bit more playful, and that'll be reflected in how we make the brush strokes, right? So we'll continue moving out, start interjecting more of our cerulean blue yet again. Now it's more of an even mix between these two. Like that. It could even actually be a little bit darker, but it is going to mix with this darker pigment. So we don't need to add too much more of that dark hue. Just enough that it feels cohesive in the transition. Good. A little bit more. This is one of those processes where you really have to trust yourself. You recognize that it's going to get a little awkward before it gets nice again, and that's okay. That is just the process of layering, often. Now we're going to have a lot of beautiful, heavily moving water down there, but before we get to it, we want more of that cerulean blue mix. Have some large rocks through here. There we go. And again, just moving it all in the direction of the wave. Okay, so taking a step back, again, we can see looking very unfinished, but we have begun, and that is the most important part. Now, I want to continue blocking, which means I want to do the area of water here that has light coming through. It's similar to this. And then we want to work on the base of this wave that's crashing, right? In addition to that, we can do the foam, but I think we stick within the palette we are currently working in. So we have our titanium white, we have our teal, a little bit of our ultramarine blue, but not too much. And we want a little bit of our oxide black to desaturate it, ensure it's not just too prominent too early. I think this is quite lovely. So we'll do a little test up here, just make sure that it's not too much in comparison to that. I don't think it is. We'll do 1, 2 little sharp mounds to show through some of the foam that'll be through here. And I'm just using that sharp edge of the flat-headed brush to ensure that these are pretty clean markings. I really love the waves that we have behind, and if we want to retain those and make sure those look quite nice, we need to ensure that the areas in front of it are rendered with intention as well. Now we go over here, and the base of this falling water is more akin to this rather than the top, because the top has 2 layers of water, right? If we think about this, this wave, this part of the wave, is 1 layer of water that's coming up and the light's shining through it. Where with this portion, where it's come up and now it's coming back down, the light has to move through one part of the wave, which is thicker, and then a second part of the wave here, which is more thin. So it's passing through 2 portions, where here it's only passing through 1, and this, it's only grazing the top of it. So this and this should be brighter because more light can move through. This should be darker because less light can move through, but it's still going to have elements of this. So always think about how much light can move through your subject, how much light can move around your subject, what's blocking it. In this case, it itself is blocking it from getting something brighter, more saturated. And so we are going to grab a little bit of water, keep this nice and running. I'm going to apply this somewhat to the base here, but I'm going to recognize that I need to make it darker because of where it's placed. So that's a good start. You can see a little bit of a open canvas between this and the larger portion. That's intentional because, of course, we're going to have the foam through there, and I want to do it with a smaller brush that I can be more intentional with. Now towards the top, again, make it darker. We'll probably add some cerulean blue, a little bit of oxide black. I think we go darker yet again. Blue, black. That might be it, with a little bit more green. But the green brightened it because the green has a brighter value. Some more black yet again. We'll give this a go. Oh, that's lovely. Very much akin to what we have through here. Okay, very good. Remember that this will also mix with that and make it brighter. So we have two different things happening. We have the dark pigment making the bright pigment darker and the light pigment making the dark pigment brighter. Whenever you go to mix colors on your palette, you want to consider what they're mixing with on your painting, because they're not going to be the same as what they are on the palette. They're going to be reactionary with the rest of the piece. There we go. There we go. Like that. Like that a lot. Now, I think we add a little bit more of that dark hue over here. If we can blend it with what we have at the top, though it's very likely this is dried, and if so, that's okay. Just doing a little bit of these taps, get that paint on, and we can go back to the original mix or something close to it. It doesn't have to be the same, just something close. And you kind of create that bridge between the two. There we are. And it's honestly exactly what I was looking for. So it may look a little messy. It may look a little off right now, but very soon it's going to look just right. Just right. Yeah, I like that too. Okay, now we have two choices. We can go in and we can add the foam right now and have it blend with that which we have currently wet, or we can let all of this dry and then go in and add the foam over top of it. Now, I think the easiest way to go about it is to let it dry, but it can be nice when you do get some subtle blends. I think because we put so much effort into the background, we are going to let it dry, we're going to be safe, and we can get those subtle blends through a little more work and intentionality later, but we'll do it the safe way. Okay, now everything should be fully dry to the touch, and we are going to go back in through here and add all of that nice splashing effect. So with this, as we talked about, the splash is more of a cerulean blue than it is the teal, but we are going to grab a little bit of that. We do want it to be a brighter gray, so we need an abundance of our titanium white, a little bit of our oxide black, and this is going to probably get too dark first, and then we'll go back with more titanium white and brighten it back up. But we do need enough of both the white and the black that this does become more of a gray rather than a saturated blue. And we just jump back and forth till we get what we really want. I'm a big believer that you don't stop on something you kind of like. You keep mixing until you get what you really want. Because it's always possible with the right pigments and mixes. And that right there, I think, is pretty perfect. So, again, we're going to go in to the negative space. We're going to say, all right, this is splashing down here, splashing up here, splashing through here. We have a lot of almost waves of this foam, and it in itself will be very pretty, but it's also going to be that which kind of frames our wave, keeps pieces separate and unique. Trying to allow the tops of these to look like splatters, so I'm kind of going in with a corner and doing a tap, where the bottom is a bit more of a sweeping motion to the left or right. Very good. Maybe do some more taps in between, creating the idea that water is crashing up against itself in many little areas. Then we'll grab that, we'll head up here, and it will of course be falling from the top of the wave. But also erupting from this position. So it's kind of going about in a lot of different ways, and that's what keeps it continuously engaging. We're not just doing the same thing over and over. It's not just the same aesthetic over and over. It's very much evolving. Okay. Now we'll head on over to this side, but I want some extra water on my brush. We're going to do a clean, sharp line across the top back of this wave, because it will erupt up from there. And then we want to transition that little bit of a splash to a lot, like so. Now we'll start working our way down. And initially this can just be filling in the negative space, but we do want to expand upon it pretty dramatically, especially towards the bottom. It's going to start collecting with a lot of this foam as it begins to crash into the wave itself, as it crashes into itself. And there's a little bit of a pitter-patter along this edge, because this too will be erupting in its own way, though we want to do most of the detail here with the liner brush. There we go. There we go. Have some of it work its way up. And you can see we're trying to get this to be similarly as low as what we have over here, if not a little bit lower. And it has those crashing motions. Very nice. It's just layer number one. If you feel like it's too thin through any of these spots, go in with a second application. But if you feel like it's nice and thick, then you are ready for the next step. Okay, now we're going to take a step back, and we're going to very soon introduce a brand new brush with different tapping effects so we can get a lot of detail within here. But to do so first, we need a slightly darker version of it. So we're going to interject some extra Oxide black, some extra Cerulean blue, mix that up well on the palette, And then we are, in fact, going to switch our brush. I'm grabbing a smaller flat-headed brush. This one has synthetic bristles, and I'm going to peel back said bristles to get something rather disheveled. The idea here is by separating the bristles, when we pick up paint with it and we tap it on the canvas, we get hundreds of little markings, smaller than we could render with any individual brush, because even something like the liner brush has so many condensed bristles, right? For this, you really can get individual little taps. So now we'll grab that new pigment. As you can see, we're going to go in, we're going to tap shadows. We'll be doing this later with highlights as well, but it's a good start, a good way to build. We're going to do this in areas that aren't going to be receiving a lot of light. There we go. You can also see that I'm rotating my brush in between my taps. That way I get a different marking every time, at least a little bit. We want this predominantly in the bodies of this. Now we're going to go over here. We'll have a lot more at the bottom because that's where there simply is not light. I'm going to get a little more pigment on the palette from my brush. It's important that you don't have a lot of pigment on the palette when you go to grab it with this brush, because you don't want the pigment to condense your bristles. If you're just grabbing a little bit of pigment, then typically your bristles will remain individual, which is what we really want. So just be careful and mix more paint if you need it. Or do what I did, grab it from the brush. But little taps, a good addition. If you want, you can go slightly darker again. Not going much, but again, baby steps, baby steps, baby steps through this, and we'll get to the image we really want. Putting this towards the bottoms. And I'm being careful not to get it into the open space, at least not a lot. There we go. It's almost a gradient of taps upwards. Now we also need to do this for our mid values, for our highlights, and then our golden highlights. But to do that, we need all of this to dry fully, and we also need to clean our brush well. When we do that, your bristles are going to recondense. So as you can see, it's no longer as disheveled. I am going to need to dry this extremely well before we do it again. So it's a lot of little steps in between these taps, but if you do those extra little steps of drying it, cleaning it, you are just going to get significantly better results. So I'm going to wait about 2 minutes, let that dry, clean my brush, and then we'll come back with our first little bit of highlight. Okay, so this is all fully dry to the touch, which means we can start interjecting some light into the painting. We'll grab our titanium white, and this is mostly used, mostly dry for me, so I'm basically starting with a fresh mix, but I will grab some cerulean blue, hint of our oxide black. We don't want to go to the absolute brightest mix immediately. We want to be able to build up to it. So I'm going to slowly, and I do mean slowly, work in more oxide black and cerulean blue. This should be more of a gray than a blue, but we do want it to have that blue in it because we have a lot of blue in the painting. So now we'll go back to our flat-headed brush. It is disheveled, it is cleaned, and it is perfectly ready to interject some beautiful little splashes about our waves. And as you can see here, I'm going to begin in this bottom right-hand corner because it's the easiest to fix if we don't like our mix or our application. And there are lots of little layers to this as well because there are multiple splashes going on. So I have the one that's on the outskirts, of course, which we're currently doubling down. But then we also have some on the inside, like this. And towards the bottom, there's more. We're just slowly building this up. We're going to continue that effect through here. Going to be careful not to do too much of a tap because we don't want it to get too big too quick, but just a little bit. And now I think we get closer and I'll show you the details up here. Now we'll grab that pigment. We'll head in towards the top because that's where the light is hitting. Work that all the way through here. Let it dissipate as we move towards the back of the wave. And then again, a lot of taps. You don't want too many because you want to be able to see in between these highlights, right? That's a really big part of this. It's that contrast that creates that volume and that look of density in the water. But we do want enough that it does feel full of light. And then some very minor taps towards the bottom once we start to run out of pigment. We'll grab some more. We'll head on over to the left-hand side. And we'll recognize yet again, much like this side, that there are a number of areas that are exploding up. This is quite fun. Truly quite fun. Again, we want this towards the tops. Every time we see this trail out, it means there is a top relatively close above it. We can even place it towards these more translucent green heavy areas. Now this will start to look pretty good at this point, but I would like to let you know that it's going to look a whole lot better very soon. We're still in the preliminary stages of these highlights. And the more we build, often the better it looks. We'll need to be careful that we don't overdo, as we always are, but within reason this will be really, really wonderful. Letting those taps spill out into the wave. There we are. Creating a little bit of a mist by just softly working this out. Yeah, I like that. Yet again, we clean this brush so the pigment doesn't dry on it, because we don't want these bristles to condense with pigment on them forever. And then we're going to dry this, and then we're going to come back in with our next layer of highlight. Okay, so yet again, taking a step back, making sure it's all fully dry to the touch, and it is, so we can have fun adding highlight. I don't know about you, but I think adding highlight is probably one of the most fun portions of painting in general, just adding light to things. Seeing that pop, seeing that contrast, I think that's really where often we feel like it's coming together. So this time around, I'm just grabbing more titanium white than I was last time, more cerulean blue than I was last time, slightly less oxide black than I was last time, building up a brighter pigment. It's still not the brightest pigment, we could still go a whole lot brighter if you look at that in comparison, but it is moving in the direction we want it to. We have our flat-headed brush. It is pretty much dry. I'm just going to fan the bristles, make them a little more distinct. And then, yet again, we come up to the top. We apply our new round of highlight. Add that nice mist to the back. And we're off to a great start. You'll see every time we do this, it won't have a big impact, but it will have an impact. And that's what we're looking for. You can see that I'm also going to be jumping around a lot to add these pigments. Often it's not just in one designated area and then I move on. I kind of balance things by doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there. A lot of this is falling, so I'm trying to do the taps as if it is falling. Then we have these heights where it's crashing towards the bottom. Very good. Let's mix up a bit more paint. Because I'm not mixing a lot of paint, because I don't want to pick up too much paint, we do have to go back and add to our mix often, but that just makes us a more practiced painter. That just gives us more opportunity to become better at that which we're doing, and that in itself is a great thing. So we brighten that up. We grab a brush. We go back in brighter than before. See, every time it just feels even better. Ooh, love that. Love that look down there. Have to be careful that we don't make it too bright, because we need the top to be the brightest. But we're definitely doing a good job. Definitely moving in the right direction. There we go. Trying to add slightly more thick pigment. So my first tap's towards the top, that way they do get that extra opacity. It's okay if it is a little more dense than the base or the openings. There we go. You can see little by little we get there. Starting to feel like a real wall of falling water. Very nice. That said, much like the last application, this one too is not our final. We are going to add more detail, more highlight. We just need to build this up a little bit first. So now at this point I think we can switch our mix, and that's good because we're going to need time for this to dry. In that time we're going to clean our brush extremely well. We're also going to clean our water extremely well because I want to go back to the Naples yellow, and we don't want that mixing with our cerulean, right? So let's clean it all up and then we'll jump back into the highlights. Okay, now everything is nice and dry. My brushes are clean, our water is clean, and we can proceed to add some beautiful real highlight. Now, I'm actually going to begin with the liner brush, and we'll grab some titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow, which is, yes, starting to dry on my palette. I do sometimes get that question. How do I keep pigment from drying on my palette? And the answer is, it does dry on my palette. I just often reload the palette with new pigment. That said, here I'm actually going in with the liner. As you can see, I'm tapping myriad of splashing water and effects across the bow of this wave. And I know you're quite a ways away. I just want to show you what it looks like at a distance first, because I think balance is more important than technique. But I will get you closer temporarily, shortly. We're just adding little bits of this highlight. There we go. Okay, let me get you closer and I'll show you the actual technique. Okay, so back at it, we have our titanium white, or Naples yellow, good thick amount, and we can begin going towards the tops of these explosive splashes and just tapping on so many of these minute markings. I'm trying to move my brush around a little bit, that way they do connect with each other here and there, because your splashes of water won't just be dots, sometimes they'll be little actionable pieces, and we're trying to capture that spirit of the moving water through said actions, through said motions. So I think about the leading lines of the water, the way in which it's moving, and then I accommodate my brush with a similar idea. We are going to have some down here because it is going to wrap its way around the entirety of the wave. There's going to be less down here, but it will still be a portion. And this will be nice because it'll separate it from the backing. You do little bits that work their way in, catch light, move up. But because this is the only inclusion of the gold through here, it will be a bit more prominent and noticeable, which gives it a real superpower in making parts you want stand out, stand out. Just say, try not to overdo it. You know? You can always go back and then add more after. I do want some towards the top of this because it is moving up quite high, catching a lot of light, though it should dissipate as we move down. There we go. Okay, from a distance, I think that's looking like a good start. We have our basic outline, our basic area. Now, let's expand on that with our larger flat-headed brush. We'll grab some titanium white, yet again, Naples yellow, more titanium white than Naples yellow. Brighten it even more. And we'll switch on over to, you guessed it, our old distilled, our old disrupted brush. There we go. Continuously going back and peeling these is just going to render slightly better results. And after we put this much thought, time, effort, and love into a painting, I think it's worth it to do the extra effort. Now we'll grab that pigment, go up towards the top, as we have before, sprinkle that light onto the canvas. There we go. A lot of mist coming up the back of this. Like that. Grab some more. Beautiful. Oh yeah. I was liking how it was looking, but I could tell that it was missing that glow. And here we are, finding it, experiencing it, presenting it. Quite lovely. Now we'll switch on back to the large flat-headed brush. Grab some more of both pigments. I've thinned them initially with a good amount of water, but again, you do need some opacity in this to keep the pigments looking strong. So apply that. Good job. Good job. Grab a little bit more. Break that down. Break that in. Beautiful. A little bit of mist coming off the side. Once you have almost no pigment on your brush, you can just do that tap and swirl effect to get that misty look. Here, we'll do a bit up above the wave. Like that. Now, we do this one more time, just adding more titanium white this time. No Naples yellow, because we already have Naples yellow in the mix. Grab my liner brush for some intentionality. And we'll say, okay, the wave's coming down like this. Let's re-interject the movements that make that look the way it does. They're flying off into the open sky. That's always a really nice look. When you can bridge the land or the sea and the sky through that water that's just kind of throwing itself around. Then it almost looks like our clouds, because it flies up and it's on this angle, and then it's more horizontal before it falls. And that can be a really neat look, because you want to blend your sky into your sea, and when your clouds and your water start looking somewhat the same, you know that things are cohesive. You know that you are doing good on that front. Just adding a bit more here and there. You know, you can rewind the video about 40 minutes and you'll see a very different painting. Hopefully this is a nice little reminder that if you just keep going, if you just keep painting, you do get to where you want to go. It just takes some resilience, some faith in yourself, some faith in the process, some faith in the instructor, you know, that's me. But, you know, together we can figure this all out and we can make something great. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. I think we're going to have a little bit of this light work its way over this wave. So it's going to start off by just being these dotted horizontal lines, like that. And then they're going to start falling, like so. You can see how the wave moves up, goes flat, and then comes back down. And that's very much the current objective. Just adding textures with taps. Good inclusion with your line work. Just make it feel a little more natural, a little more realistic. And I think, despite it being so little work, it adds a massive amount to the painting as a whole. There we go. Little taps. Lots of little taps. Taking a step back, looking at it in the viewfinder. Very, very, very happy with how this is going. Might now expand this a little bit. Other side too. Yeah, now it really feels like a rolling wave. Good. Okay. Well, from here, still have a lot to do to this wave, believe it or not. So, I think we put down the highlights for a second and we start moving into this body. Deliver some detail there to start complementing what we have towards the top. But that's wonderful. For our next step, we are going to return to our cerulean blue, our oxide black, our titanium white, and we're going to make a mid darker bluish gray. We want it to be on the darker side of bluish gray. I think this is actually a great mix to begin with. And we're going to apply with none other than the liner brush. Not a big surprise, but here we're going to start doing the foam that works its way from the bottom, the waves, up into the actual body of the wave. So here, I'm going to begin by doing lots of little taps, and then I'm going to make more of those Z-like shapes that we talked about in the back waves. So here you can see it's just a lot of little Zs connected to one another. Also, this looks far darker in person than it does on the camera because it's reflective. So do try to aim for something that's not too bright. We can always brighten it later, but for now we're just making lots of little movements that feel like they're wrapping around this turn. And it shouldn't be too tricky because we've done this. We have done this before. Do some little taps as well. Doesn't all have to be lines in the end. There we are. Very nice. We want them to be a little bit darker underneath areas like this because we have a lot of shadow from the actual wave. So I like to start my applications more so towards the outskirts of these sides, more towards the middle. And then I build out our applications from there. As you can see, as the pigment dries, it gets a lot less noticeable. And that's because it's so watery, which is working to our favor. Now we have it wrapping towards the top. There we are. Create some beautiful leading lines. Fill in the negative space of taps. Very good. And then when they get towards the bottom, they start to get a little more flat. They start to meet each other and start to combine to a point, like so. We do need more up here though. I'm just slowly adding it. Okay. Then, once it flattens out from here, it's going to continue expanding, but it's going to start expanding into actual waves again. For that, we want our mix to get a little bit brighter. So I'm going to grab more of our titanium white, work that in here. Blue, oxide black, but not as much. Switch back to the liner. And then we can start real waves again. And these are also like large Zs. And then you go back to the connecting point and you just expand it outwards. We can go over some of these past markings again, but you want it to get darker as it moves up the wave and brighter as you move away from the wave, as a general rule. I'm gonna make it a bit more crash as we continue expanding. It'll look pretty basic to begin with. That's okay. That's how we want it. We're going to slowly expand upon these as we did everything else. We're going to have lots of little ones over here. Little baby waves that are just jumbling together. Very good, very good. Now I think we take a little bit of a step back. I make sure you can see everything. We'll let that dry and then we'll continue. Okay, now taking a step back, I think it's going quite well, and we can continue building those highlights, those details. I'm going to mix a bit more paint than I did before because now I know I'm on the right track, and we can just kind of double down on the, I think, correct decisions that we've been making. So we'll mix this up. As you can see, interject a lot of titanium white, though it is getting harder and harder to find that on my palette. That's okay. We are going to make use of that which we have. Some more blue. Very nice. And then we'll switch back to the liner. For this, we do want to double down on a lot of the waves that we have through here. So I'll come in to the larger ones, and then whenever I have this top corner that we made through the Z, I'll just start moving this pigment down because the light is coming this way. It's on the right hand side. And then we can make lots of little waves in between the bigger ones, similar to what we did in the background. This way it feels lively, choppy, all of the things that a scene like this probably should. Those are some pretty dramatic skies, and with them come some pretty dramatic seas. Again, just watched the Odyssey the other day, and it really was just an incredibly visceral experience. The way they depicted those storms, and such an art to be able to do that. So we're just trying to capture not a storm's that intense, but you know, those golden skies potentially after the storm. We've gone through the grandeur of it, the heightened nature, and this is where we found ourselves. I'm going to grab some more paint. Right now, a lot of these markings are isolated towards the middle, so we're going to begin trying to work our way out and ensure that this isn't too focused in one spot. We don't want the eye to get stuck, right? We can also move some of this highlight upwards, but we have to be careful because remember, the higher up we get, the darker it should get because there's more shadow to be had up there. It's not to say that we can't have any of this highlight, but it means that we have to be careful with that which we incorporate. I will say, I think those additions really helped it. So maybe we do slightly more. Be careful of your angles. Make sure that they're still fulfilling the original intent. There we go. Very good, very good. Maybe there are a couple that do lead up a bit higher, then kind of break off into those Z patterns. Come back, find each other and themselves down below. Nice to have the mix of the brighter and the darker markings as well, to not just have it be one thing, right? There we are. Okay. Now, more pigment. And we'll start this down here. Though perhaps at this point I get you a little bit closer. That way we can focus on the details. We are definitely at that point. Now we're going to get a little closer. We're going to mix up an even brighter mix of that which we were just using. Still using a little bit of the oxide black and the blue, but we are getting brighter. We are switching to the liner, and we are going to continue adding highlights to the tops of all of these little waves. Then we'll also start to add the foam in between. And this will have more titanium white in it than our previous mixes. But, you know, we're going to have all of this crashing water with it. Is going to spawn some little bubbles, some brighter areas. And we want the last layer to still show through. We're not replacing all of those applications. We're not trying to hide any of it. We're just doing more and filling in some of the negative space. Because when there is negative space, when there is areas that are a little less rocky, then the foam has area to move and settle, right? So we'll just have that come down, have that come down. This area as a whole is going to be very detailed, very bright, because we are now much closer to us in the foreground. And we have that opportunity to render the detail the eye typically can't see in the background. So it's more expressive, it's more dominant, and as you can already see, it builds a far more dramatic look, which is what we've been wanting to build towards. We're not going to bring it up too high because, of course, while we can have a little bit here, we want this area to be darker and to remain so. We just need enough so that it transitions upwards and it feels like a cohesive, larger subject. But there we are. And I'm really excited to do this spot because I think that's where things are really going to start feeling complete. This should look good, this should feel good, but it's certainly not the end of our voyage and our quest with this water. You can see we're very often going back for new pigment. rather than just scraping what I have on the brush into the canvas. Going back and grabbing more often renders a much better result. There we go. Very good. Very good. Okay, now we're taking a real step back, making sure we like how it's looking. We're going in the right direction, and I can say very happily that I think we are, in fact. I kind of want to bridge these movements into the ones that move back a little bit better, so I'm just from a distance painting these transitions in. Slightly more taps that start to rotate upwards, larger movements that bridge into that. But as a whole, I think it's quite strong. We might take out this bright line if we remix the color for the water, which we will be doing in a little bit, but I do like that. I think something else we can do is maybe add a slightly more bright teal up in here. And we can continue to build out this once we have that established. So, as for where we are, I'm very happy. We're on the right path. I'm going to grab some Oxide black, a little bit of our blue, a little bit of our Naples yellow, yet again, working on a new subject, the rock, over here to the left-hand side of the canvas. There we go. And then that'll protrude forward a couple of different ways. And then it'll find its way back into the ocean. I've been really excited about this because it'll add a nice vignette to the painting. Draw the eye in towards the center as the eye does innately go to the brightest point. But we can also have some water dripping on it. We can have water splashing up onto it. It's just going to interact with the landscape in a really beautiful way. And we're starting, again, with some blues and some yellows interjected in there. Once I have that, it's time we incorporate the remainder of the water down here, which will have a small amount of our teal, which, as you can see, is starting to dry quite dramatically on my palette, but I can still get a little bit of it. Our cerulean blue, we want more cerulean blue than teal. Titanium white, oxide black. There we go. Want a mid to gray value blue, something we can make substantially brighter. Work that down here. It's going to be splashing upwards in a variety of ways. Then I'm going to be relatively careful, not too careful, but relatively careful around this because I don't want to mix into it too much. If we do blend into it, that's okay. It'll create a kind of neat sinking feeling where the rock is sinking into the water. It just makes the water have some extra depth. So you know what, I actually will do a little bit of a blend towards the base. Just the base, I want that line to be sharp. If you accidentally blend, that's okay too, because we can always just go back and fix it up, but I like that. I like that a lot. Make sure that this is a nice thick base layer, and then we can head into our next part of this application together. Very good. Greetings and welcome to part 3, the final part of this grand wave painting. We've been really chipping away, adding a lot of love to this over the last month, and I'm really excited to bring it to fruition. I know it looks like we're almost done, but we do still have all of this towards the bottom. We're going to go back up here, really brighten things, touch them up, make it feel like it's glowing, and I'm really excited about how this is turning out, so I'm excited to get back into it. That said, I noted it's part 3. If you're up over on Patreon, hey, thank you. I hope you're enjoying. I hope you're liking the bonus lessons. If you are up on YouTube, then you're probably watching this in a singular part. I'll probably edit them all together, and then once I'm done all of them, I'll post them on YouTube. But if you would like lessons like this early, broken up, digestible, you can find them, again, early on Patreon, ad-free. And again, we're just going to jump back into this. We're just going to keep enjoying. I hope you're having a lovely week. I hope that the painting so far has been quite good to you, and that you're also motivated to pick up that brush and have some fun getting creative. Now, as for our palette this week, it's actually big surprise. The same palette we've been working with. So we have our turquoise green, titanium white, Naples yellow, cerulean blue, and our oxide black. It's amazing what you can do with such a simple, limited palette, but you really do have a lot of opportunity with a little bit of blending. So again, today we're going to begin right down here. It is, of course, dry, as this is a brand new day, but if it isn't dry, I would recommend letting it dry and then moving on to this next step. The next step is going to be interjecting some really nice detail into the rocks through here. It's going to be some golden highlights. So we're going to take the golds that are up in the right-hand corner, bring them down into the bottom left-hand corner. That way, we're not only balancing the top and the bottom of the painting, but we're also balancing the left and the right side of the painting. It's always important when you have a good amount of color in one specific area of the painting to interject little bits of it elsewhere. And we do have some of this gold in the tops of all of our waves, but this will be a really great balancing feature. And it'll also, again, continue to act as a nice vignette. Then once this is complete, we can start going into the water. We can splash a lot of water onto the rock, have water running through the rocks, and this will have some nice large splashes as well, which should complement these. And it almost should feel like we have 3 waves of waves. And that way it's an odd number, it's dynamic, it keeps the eye moving. And in theory, we're also going to do this in a way that makes it feel like it's erupting upwards, creating a leading line into the larger wave. So a lot of thought has gone into this. And I think that's something I was talking about at the end of the last lesson. So important, especially as you get towards the end of a painting, to go in with a plan, with intentionality. It's so easy to get caught up in the enthusiasm of completing the rest and having that look good, that you're like, okay, I just want to finish it really quickly so I can have it done, so I can look at my finished painting. But realistically, I think the end of the painting is where you should be putting in the most time, because you've already put so much love and care into the rest of it. You want that strong finish. You want this to look just as good as everything else, not rushed. So that's why we're breaking this one up into 3 parts. And again, I'm really excited to get into it. So let's get you a little bit closer and let's have some fun. Now, because the pigment is so dark, we do have a little bit of a sheen on here, and you can see it when I move my body around the canvas. So I'm going to try to create a little bit of a shadow on it for this painting portion, but we are going to add a lot of highlights into the rocks, and we're going to start with our Naples yellow, a little bit of our titanium white to desaturate it, and then we're going to continue desaturating with some oxide black that we don't want a lot of it. We're looking for a nice gray gold. Again, something to complement the clouds in the sky. We have a number of different variants in this mix. You can see some are a little more saturated, some are darker, some are more yellow, and that variance will be nice along the rock. The light is coming this way, so the tops of the rock are going to receive some light. So we're just going to go in and say, all right, the top of the rock is through here, and then we're just kind of imagining all of the little protruding areas. The areas to the right are also going to get a lot of light, but the areas to the left like that aren't. So here we have a protruding spot, getting a lot of light. This is kind of the top, but it's kind of facing the left-hand side, so it's not going to get that much highlight. And then we're going to have a good amount of highlight over here. Very simple way to think about it and begin. But then, of course, again, the light's coming this way, so the face of the rock is going to get a good amount of highlight, and we're just going to bring this down to show that face of the rock. Quite nice in the reference photo. It's very distinct. And then we have other little rocks in the side that protrude and they catch light. But this area is a little bit darker and this area is a little bit darker. We can go in with a more subtle hue later on, but for now, I think we keep it very simple. And then I'm going to add a good amount of texture and highlight to the top of this rock. Have a little bit of that light moving down here. And then when I have almost no pigment left on my brush, it's water and a hint of pigment, then I can go in and add the extra texture and little rock movements towards the back and in that negative space, because we don't want there to be a fully almost black looking negative space. We want it to still have some hue, we want it to still reflect a little bit of light, have some protrusions, and this is just going to make it a lot more interesting as a whole. So micro applications and adjustments. Now we have a good amount of pigment on our brush again, so I'm going to use that towards the top, double down on the areas that are going to get a lot of highlight. Because we are working with a light pigment over a dark area, you will need to do multiple layers to build it up appropriately. And then, again, lots of little movements down. And almost abstract ones in the negative space. So, easy start. We will also have a lot of water running over this, which will account for a good amount of the detail, but this is a good starting point. I'm beginning by adding the highlight now to all of the tops and right-hand sides as we did before, but with these slightly more distant versions of the rock. Nice. Move that down. Look at us. It's coming together so quickly. We've had a lot of practice with this painting. And despite the fact that I'm trying to take it slow, because I want to give this ending portion as much time, attention, and respect as it deserves, because we put a lot of that into everything else, it's still going quickly because we're feeling more comfy in this space. But yeah. 3 little rocks. I'll try to put my shadow in front of it so you can see it without any glare. And we're doing well. Now I'm going back up here to just interject slightly more light. Trying to balance the top corner. It's worth noting I'm not going to do as much highlight on the far area here because I still want this to be somewhat vignetted. So the highlights are built inwards more. Another thing to take note of is as I do this, I'm trying really hard to make sure that the tops, the areas that have light, don't have a little bit of the underlayer showing through, so it is fully bright on the edge. If you have a lot of this yellow and gold and then we have a little black line, it will look awkward. So do take that extra time to make it just right. And then you can build some of these highlights into the water because the rocks will be underwater. They will be still catching some light, and this will just make it look more three-dimensional. There we go. Okay, now we'll take a step back just so we can see that top corner with that. And I think now we do have multiple rows of that golden highlight. It's starting to look beautiful. We are going to let that dry and then we'll come in with the waves which will wash over it. But great step forward, and again, it's just looking better and better. Now for our water, we're going to begin by essentially sketching in where the tops of our waves are going to be. That way we have a good idea of the general movements. For this, I'm grabbing just a hint of both blues, good amount of our titanium white, and honestly, I think that should be fine. We're going to go for a pretty watery mix, so I have a good amount of water on my brush that'll thin this in a way that we want it to. And then, as for the actual water, we're going to have some of it running down our rocks, and this is really just following all of the little crevices that we've previously set out in them. So in theory, the water is splashing up behind these rocks. It's coming on through and over, breaking apart into many little channels, and then it kind of whooshes out at the bottom. Nice and easy. We're going to have a lot more coming through here. Multiple strands, larger ones than before. Just making it powerful. Good. Now we'll go back up towards the top. In the reference photo, there's a lot at the top. I'm going to start with a little bit less, but this is done through a variety of taps. As you can see, I'm trying to leave some openings, and that can kind of work its way back through this channel. You can go back over the areas you really like and double layer them. I think that's important. So far, so good. And now, our rocks look far better integrated, and they're just going to look better and better. It's almost like painting little waterfalls. Lots of water on my brush, very subtle applications, and then doubling down when need be. But from here, again, we want to sketch our waves. So titanium white, cerulean blue, our turquoise, and back to the liner. For now, we're going to essentially ignore these waves. We'll actually paint quite a bit on top of them because we have this large eruption of water, this wave that's coming in this way. Now, there'll be lots of splashing at the top of the wave, and it'll get more grand through here. Like that, and then it'll kind of come back down, though it's still splashing. And we're almost following this line that we have, but it's higher at one point. And then it gets lower towards the side, towards this edge, and then it breaks into a wave. Now we can do another wave over here that kind of merges into this one, and this is going to be our transition point where things start to become one. Now, we have waves within waves, kind of like we do here. So I'm going to go towards the center. I'm going to start creating some little splashes, which lead their way up to this top right hand splash. And then I'm going to bring those together into this larger movement. And then it is going to come down into other little waves, like so. Much like our other waves before, this is all going to look a little abstract to begin with. Now we'll do more of these motions down. We can do another minute wave here, just crashing up against the water, or rather against the rocks. So we have a small wave here, we have a wave here, we have a wave here, they all connect together. We'll double down on the areas we like with additional applications, and then when we have almost no paint left, we'll go into the negative space, similar to the rocks, and we'll just tap on small intricate markings which lead the eye and just create texture as a whole. Nothing too dramatic though. Yeah. Again, doesn't look like much yet, but it will soon. With the addition of more titanium white, more cerulean blue, this time we're voiding the teal. This time we're voiding the teal. Good. Maybe add a hint of our oxide black since this is a thicker pigment. And our last application will just naturally get darker as it dries because it's very wet, very watery, where this is going to remain more opaque. So I'm going to go to the top of this one again, tap on lots of those splashes, and this can be similar to how we did the top over there. I think already this makes so much more sense. Just took a small handful of taps, but we are going to continue. Bringing this down, having it splash out. I think this one also needs a similar approach, where now we are just going into the tops of the microwaves within the big splashing one, and we'll connect that up. And we can add a little bit of this highlight into the waves that connect it, bring it inwards. Very good. Still again, far from finished. This little guy, love a lot of that white water working its way around and through the rock. And this goes back down before it kind of goes back up, and we have some of that splashing behind the rock too, which we only really want to do with the liner brush because we do want very intentional markings here. This working its way upward. We can do it. We're in that final stretch. We will make this a beautiful painting we hoped it would be. Again, going back in, adding little textures as I run out of paint. And then big movements within the waves towards the foreground, which will wrap around our rocks. I'm going to leave a little bit of the rock under them to show that parts of them are underwater, and you can see that part of them that is. I think that's a really interesting look. Just gives it really easy depth. And then the taps that lead into the dramatic top. So you can see how the taps eventually connect into these more wave-like structures. And we can have additional little explosions of water throughout. Might even add a rock towards the center of this area. could be a neat look. It's not in the reference photo, but sometimes those artistic liberties make for powerful additions, you know? Yeah, taking a step back, I really like the motion, how it feels like it's kind of wrapping and exploding around this area, but I think there could definitely be a rock within here, which would be nice because you'd move this out from just the left-hand side, make it a bit more cohesive, and then maybe we could throw another little rock in there, maybe even one over here. I like this a lot. That's the next step, and then we'll go back to the waves. Now I'm going to do this with the liner brush because I want to make these nice and small to begin with. I'll grab some Naples yellow, Cerulean blue, Oxide black, mix that up, and then again, there's definitely one in the center here, like so. And we'll just fill that in. It's going to be quite reflective. Actually, this is a great example of that reflective quality because we have some right beside it that are dry, and you can see how they look in comparison. Now I'll add another little rock there. Maybe one right here. We don't want to overdo this, but now that we're committing to having this be a rocky area as a whole, I think there is room for addition. Then over here, I like the idea of a longer but less tall one, like so. We can do a soft blend down into the water to show that it is somewhat submerged. We can do that with this too. Then we can come back with a hard line across the edge, which will bring it back into the piece. I like that idea. Yeah. Maybe we have a little one back there. Hopefully you enjoy the improvisation in real time. Typically I turn off the camera and then I do some sketches and then I kind of paint it in my head, and you know, it can be a longer process of figuring it out, but I think if you want to just kind of feel the flow of the painting, sometimes just going in and painting it is even better. Just another hint back here. Yeah. Very good. Very, very good. Now we need those to dry, and then we can add in the golden highlights like we did with the other one at the start of today. Okay, now we've given the rocks a good number of minutes to dry. I think they look quite nice, and that means we can very simply get back to painting the highlights on them with the Naples yellow, titanium white, oxide black. Okay, we don't want anything too strong, but we know how this works. The top of them, the right hand side of them, that's where the light is. We can work this all the way down. Lots of little taps. This part kind of protrudes. It'll catch a little bit of light. Maybe this can down here too. Then on this side, also relatively simple. The farther away they get, the less detail they have, so your strokes will become lessened. Don't feel like that means you're doing a worse job. It just means you're being mindful of the amount of detail the eye can read. And that's an important thing to be. I like how we're able to splash a little bit of extra gold down into the bottom for the sake of the sky. I think this was one of those things that you don't really plan to do, but you get really lucky with. Now I want to tap in a little bit of texture, so less line work, more just dotting here and there. We can reinforce portions of rocks that we like, and then when we have almost no pigment left on our brush, yet again it's additional little movements within the shadow parts of the rock. This is best done when you have a little bit of water on your brush. That way the paint just glides and you get those semi-transparent kind of washes over that what you're doing.
but very nice. Now that we have these rocks established, let's add some extra water to them. Titanium white, a little bit of cerulean, hint of our turquoise. Make that fairly bright, also fairly watered down. You do want a good amount of water on the brush. And we can tap some of those splashes up onto the rocks so they look far more three-dimensional within the space. You want a lot of layering in paintings like these. You want tiny little markings over your other markings. You want to accept that sometimes you are going to let go of detail, and that's okay. Just want it all to feel like it's truly a part of the space. Doing some higher splashes. Make this feel a bit more grand at the bottom as well, because it is in the background. And oh, here we really get to see the water, so we should take advantage of that. There we go. Instead, we still need that old flat-headed brush for the real detail work, so we're going to let this dry and then we'll come back in with that. You know what? Actually, while we let that dry, I want to grab a mid to light blue. So we're going to use both our turquoise and our cerulean, good amount of titanium white, hint of our oxide black. There's something I forgot to do in the previous lesson, rather important. We're going to work on the little bits of water that kind of form lines in and amongst these splashes. But this is the part of the wave that feels a little bit more structured through this edge. And it's not going to have a dramatic impact, but it is a nice little detail. So the water's falling. We can paint little lines coming off of it, little taps, similar to all of the erupting water, right? And then it follows through in here. We can also create a slightly more inner line that connects to some of the horizontal pieces that we have. Oh yeah. I don't know how I forgot about this. Such a lovely little inclusion. So easy. But it goes to show when you work on these big, complex paintings, there's so many little pieces that often you get to the end and you think you're done. You're like, oh no, I can go back and I can make this look so much better. Again. Really fun. And it's starting to fall again over here. There we go. It's getting quite dark in the room, quite cloudy, much like the painting. Again, good atmosphere. Okay, and we are ready for the very fun edition of all of that golden highlight sprinkling over our painting. So for this, again, titanium white and Naples yellow are the only pigments we will be using. We'll try to get a nice warm whitish mix. And then we're going to swap over to the old flat-headed brush, which again, I have not used today, so it is fully dry, but we are going to peel back all of the bristles. Make it nice and disheveled. Grab that newly mixed pigment, and we are going to tap this towards the tops of all of these splashes. Going to take our time, we're going to rotate our brush in between the taps. There we go. And then we'll let that work its way back down pretty subtly. Now this in theory is the front of the wave catching light. So we'll probably want to do a slightly different mix for the back. And that means cleaning our larger flat-headed brush, making the camera brighter because a big cloud just came in. There we go. Nice. Now we'll go for our blue. Still have a hint of the Naples yellow in there. Again, we're lucky in that it's a Naples yellow because it's not going to turn into a green. Hint of Oxide black. Maybe a little more white. And then we can grab this and layer it over top some of those taps, but for the most part, this is behind. So the very top of the wave is still going to be that golden hue, but the area right behind it can be more of this splashed bluish hue, which does have hints of the gold as well. There we are. Again, lots of atmospheric mist coming from it. I'll have some up here. We're farther away from the light, so this won't be as golden. We're kind of covering some of these back rocks and just making it feel like some really powerful water is moving on top. Then we'll go back to the liner, grab more of the titanium white, brighten up this mix. And then you can do this with either the liner or that same old flathead brush, but I'm going to interject some even brighter highlights. Something to bridge what we just did and the gold to a greater degree. Very good. Very good. I like that. Okay, so now taking a step back, I think that's looking quite nice. I want a slightly darker blue to expand upon our larger wave, so we're going to mix that up with our Cerulean, just our Cerulean, our Oxide black and our titanium white. Then we'll switch back to this, which I did end up cleaning while I was waiting for things to dry. And now I'm just trying to take the extra water off. Again, you don't want a lot of water on this brush through the tapping portions, but I do want some extra taps towards the bottom of these waves just to make it feel integrated a little bit more cleanly. I almost felt like there was a little bit of a hard stop to it, and we want this to feel like it's working in to the rest of it. I think that right there was not a lot of tapping, but it did enough of a job. And then we can do some of that here, just have it falling. Little details that do accumulate. It's okay if we lose some detail, by the way. We're almost trading details, right? When we go over areas, we take details away, but we add details. We're just kind of doing it all. But I think that makes it feel much more grand, the way it's kind of working its way through this rocky area. I like that a lot. Maybe we grab a hint more titanium white and just solidify the areas that we love, that we just worked in. Not going to love all of it, but there are going to be parts and they're going to deserve that added texture and attention. I also don't typically mix with this brush, but I'm grabbing very, very small amounts of paint, so I'm not too worried about it. Adding a little bit of falling water through there. And another thing that I really want to do is go back to this portion, because this is where the most light is going to be moving through the wave. I think we have an opportunity to get a beautiful glow. So I'm going to take some titanium white, move it to a completely clean spot on my palette, grab a little bit of our turquoise green. There we go. Probably a hint of our oxide black, just a hint. Going to clean my brush well, that way I don't have an excess of paint, because when you mix paint with the same brush you use, often you have a buildup on your brush, and that just makes making tiny details harder. So we take off the extra, and then we go back into the top, and in the same way we did these little lines towards the bottom, we're just adding this glow that works its way through the most thin areas of the top of the wave. It's going to add some extra depth, dimension, just illuminate our main subject, right? Can also do a little bit of finger painting. You know me, love a little bit of finger painting. Always just a easy way at the end to get those smooth transitions. But yeah, I think this is just beautiful. We can brighten it up even more. Though we do need to be careful not to overdo this, because it is easy to overdo. Again, little bits just in the favorite spots. Yeah, now it really feels like light's strongly working its way into the wave. Gorgeous. We can also adjust portions of our wave. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to actually change the shape, taking a highlight. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say, what if the top of the wave is actually a little bit taller? What if it just cut through there? Well, we can do that. It means we have to go back with the gold, because this too will have light, but I just felt like it could use some extra volume, and I like that. I like that a lot. I'll probably wait for it to dry before I go in and add that added gold to that section, but again, we just approach this all in a relaxed manner, and we get what we want. Now I'll grab some titanium white, some of that Naples yellow. I'm not going to apply it here yet, but what I will do is I'll build on some of the previously established splashes, because we do have a lot of them. And now that we have the gold down here, we can see that we can add more gold to the top, and it will work well. I was hesitant to do too much initially, because we just weren't sure what the rest of the painting was going to look like, if balance-wise we could afford it. But now that we know that we can, here's a good amount of glowing mist coming off the back of it. I think that's a great inclusion. Just using the side of the brush with a lot of water on the brush and that pigment. Beautiful. I think we can also take this and work a little bit of it into some of these areas that are erupting. Much more tiny, but still can catch just a hint of this light, and that can have a nice effect on the volumes. Now, at this point, this back area is probably pretty dry, so we can go back in and just add some extra weight to the back of the wave. Oh, I'm having so much fun. I always feel like with paintings, the start is the hardest, and then you start to get your little wins and you feel good. And then you go through the middle awkward period where some portions look great, but others look not great, not finished. And then you get to that point where, you know, you're 80% done, you think, oh no, it doesn't look as good as I wanted it to, but that's because you're only 80% done. And that final 15%, everything comes together. It feels so much better. It looks so much better. It's just, oh, those are the moments we paint for, you know? And we're living them right now. We're enjoying them right now. Not taking them for granted. Just very much appreciating creating at the heart of it. Adding a little bit more of this gold highlight to our rocks. Not all of them, but there are a number that are well deserving. And this is just the real highlights, the areas that are catching the most light. There we go. Good. Good, 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 good. Again, more highlight, more glow within these little spots. And I kind of think about turning this into a larger portion of the wave, just seeing it roll in. We can do that. Some titanium white, cerulean blue, a lot more titanium white. You know we're close to the end of the painting when I'm mixing almost entirely with the liner brush because I'm just excited. I'm just excited to apply paint into these areas. I didn't think I could, and then I could, and they just got better for it, you know. So here, in theory, the wave is coming up. It's crashing into all of these rocks. But this is the back of it. Gonna have a little bit on the other side maybe. And I really, really like this dramatic highlight. I think we incorporate some of it back here. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so that'll come down. Remember, we get more light the farther out from the wave we get. Trying to work my way around some of the splashes. And then I'll kind of get lost in the mist of this. But we definitely have an opportunity for those real highlights. There we go. See how it kind of dances back and forth between the wave and the mist? That's what we're looking to do. And maybe another wave that's leading into this one. Soundily approaching. Very nice. Again, we have a lot going on down here. There's a lot going on. But I love that energy. I love that it's just so full of energy, and that as you move from the top, you have this sky which is dramatic but somewhat peaceful, and then it gets a little bit more dramatic in the background. We interject some energy with these waves and we get closer and they get bigger, and then they get really big, and then you can see the result of them. So you almost have some storytelling going on in terms of the energy, the movement, and how the world makes these subjects interact with each other. Very neat. You could simplify this area if you wanted to by
going in with about a finger's worth of darker pigment and creating the underside to this wave, which is crashing. It would take out a lot of that energy, but again, if you wanted something a little bit more relaxed, that is achievable. But I think I really, really like it the way it is. Yeah. Of course, we we never fully know. It's one of those things where you finish a painting and you look at it a month later and you think, I could go back and I could add something there. I could build on that. I've learned something new. And that's honestly what we hope for, right? That we're constantly looking back at our old paintings and thinking, I could do that a little better, because, you know, it just goes to show that there's growth and that we're thinking about things. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I had so much fun. Thank you for being here. Thank you for painting along with me. If you'd like to learn about acrylic painting, if you've been watching this because you like the idea of acrylic painting but you haven't jumped in, you can get my ebook, Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. Everything you need to know about acrylic painting up over on the Patreon. Should be linked down below. You can get the ad-free version of these videos. You can get early videos. You can get the traceables. The real-time drawing videos where I actually sketch all of this out. So if you're watching this and you haven't begun, you can still get that traceable, transfer that to canvas, and then begin. Make the whole process of scaling a lot easier. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel in all the ways that you do. To everybody up over on Patreon, thank you deeply for directly supporting the channel. And I will see you very soon with a brand new painting. This is so much fun. It really just inspired me to make more art, and that's what we're gonna do. So until next time, and above all, as always, stay creative.